Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is the next part of Ben with Gwen. A story about how Ben and Gwen's relationship evolves over the next 4 years following their summer trip. So let's start without any delay. Let's start this great series. June, Year 3, Part 2. Morning, sleepyhead. Ben's mother greeted him. Morning. Still half asleep, Ben half-heartedly returned the greeting as he trudged into the kitchen for breakfast. Last day today, huh? You excited? His father asked him, already seated at the table. Totally, Ben said with a mouthful of cereal. As he ate, he started to wake up more completely, becoming more aware of what day it was. He smiled to himself as he basked in the knowledge that another school year was finally coming to an end. If he were being honest, this was probably one of the best school years he'd ever had, but having been dumped just a month ago, his opinion of it had taken a steep dive and he was ready for it to be over. Additionally, the end of the school year meant the start of something great. Summer. As he had that thought, the image of Gwen's smiling face popped into his mind. He lowered his spoon into his bowl and stopped eating for a moment. The picture in his head was immediately recognizable. It was from back when Gwen had said goodbye to him at the very end of last summer. Why would I think of that again now? Something wrong, Ben? His mother asked him, seeing the confused look on his face. Ben shook his head. Nope. He started eating again, but he kept thinking about Gwen. That had been happening a lot lately. Sometimes he'd be watching TV or doing homework or walking around town, and a memory of Gwen would randomly enter his mind. Images of her, things they'd done together, things she'd said to him. Or sometimes he'd see something cool or funny and wonder to himself what Gwen would think of it. Ben didn't mind those thoughts. The problem was he used to only have those thoughts about Julie, and he wasn't sure what to think of that. On the one hand, he was glad he wasn't obsessing over Julie as much anymore. He still thought about her quite often as well, and he was still awkward around her at school, but he considered himself at least partially over her. That was a good thing. But on the other hand, he thought it was weird to have any thoughts about his cousin that were even remotely similar to thoughts he'd had about his girlfriend. Those two things should definitely stay separate. Thoughts of Gwen continued to occupy Ben's thoughts on his way to school, but as soon as he got there, thoughts of Julie took over once again. Since they'd broken up, they'd barely been on speaking terms. Now that the school year was ending, today would be his last chance to make up with her, otherwise he'd have to wait until next year. They didn't hate each other, and they hadn't even had a fight exactly, but Ben wasn't sure what he wanted his relationship with her to be now. As far as he could tell, his only real choices were to become friends with her again or to ignore her. A big part of him still wished he could be dating her, and maybe someday he could do so again, but she'd made herself pretty clear on that matter. In his first few classes of the day, Ben put off deciding whether or not to try making up with Julie. He told himself he would decide at lunch, and until then, he would continue to ignore her in class. But instead, all he did was daydream about his next summer trip. Just him, Gwen, and Grandpa for 3 months. They might even see Lucy, Joel, and Camille at some point as well, although that wasn't exactly going to be a rare event anymore since they were moving to Bellwood at the end of the summer. And on top of all of that, he would have nearly total freedom to use the Omnitrix. Ben smiled at that thought and started flipping through his aliens. There were so many to choose from now, he couldn't decide which one he wanted to be first. He'd probably get tons of new ones before the summer was over as well. Ben was so busy thinking about the summer trip, he ended up completely unprepared when lunchtime came. He still hadn't made a decision on whether or not to clear the air with Julie. So, like usual, he didn't sit with her and tried to avoid her completely. For the rest of the day, Ben was on the verge of talking to her in between each of his classes, but he always backed down at the last second. That was until the very end of the day. Now or never. "Hey, Julie," Ben called out as he approached her in the hallway. She was at her locker with her two best friends, just preparing to leave. He was hoping to talk to her alone, but he didn't have much choice now. Luckily, Julie's friends seemed to simultaneously figure out it would be best to give Ben and Julie a moment alone. They both whispered something to Julie and quickly walked away, smiling and giving a quick wave goodbye to the both of them. "Hey, Ben," Julie replied, giving him a gentle, cautious smile. Of course, Ben didn't know what to expect either. He hadn't prepared anything to say. If Gwen were here, she'd chew me out for never thinking things through. "Listen," Ben began, thinking on his feet. "I just thought I'd say, I hope you have a good summer." Julie seemed relieved, and smiled brightly at him. "Thanks, Ben," she said. "I hope you enjoy yours, too. Are you going on another trip with your cousin and your grandfather?" Ben remembered he'd told her about their summer trips, although he'd left out all the best parts. He was sort of regretting it now that she'd mentioned his cousin, though. Given her reasons for breaking up with him, that was the last thing he wanted to talk about with her. Yeah, we are," Ben said. "Cool," Julie said, closing her locker. "Well, have fun, and see you next year." She waved, then turned to leave. "Bye," Ben said. He stood there and watched her walk away. He wasn't sure whether or not to count that as a success. He'd talked to her, but barely. They hadn't really talked anything out or decided where they stood with each other now. All they'd done was wish each other a good summer. He'd been hoping for a little more than that. Maybe next year. Ben's concerns about Julie didn't last long after he left school. After all, his summer vacation had just started, and that meant it was time for the annual summer trip. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, Dad." Ben called out as he barged through his front door and ran to his room. "Hi, Ben," his mother answered as he ran past her. In his room, Ben tossed his backpack against the wall and went to pull his suitcase out of the closet. Hurriedly, he began stuffing his clothes, games, and other belongings into it. From behind him, Ben heard his door open, but he didn't stop packing to see who it was. "Hey there, Ben," he heard his father's voice say. "Hey, Dad," Ben said, stuffing an unfolded pile of shirts into his bag. "Your grandpa's on his way. You almost done packing?" his father asked. "Working on it," Ben replied. His father chuckled. You didn't have to wait until the last second to pack." "Yeah, well, I like to think of it as adding some tension to the situation." "Well, aren't you quite the action hero?" his father quipped. "You excited to see your grandpa again?" he asked. "I actually saw him a few days ago." "You did?" "Yep. Me and Gwen went to see him a few days ago," Ben explained. "Oh. You kids really run around all over town, huh?" Kyle shook his head and smiled to himself. "Well, I'm sure you're excited to spend the whole summer with him again, at least. You know it," Ben said, shoving the last of his things into his luggage. "And I'm sure you're looking forward to spending it with your cousin as well." "Oh, come on, Dad," Ben complained, feeling like he was being teased again. "They're here," Sandra called from the other room. "Coming," Ben shouted, trying to grab all of his bags at once. Carl shook his head as he stepped forward to help him with some of them. "Thanks," Ben said, rushing out of the room ahead of his father, carrying what he could. As he ran through his house and out the front door, he could feel the Omnitrix on his wrist. After wearing it for so many years, he almost never registered the feeling of it on his arm anymore. But today, it felt like it was brand new, and he couldn't wait to get on the road so he could go hero whenever he wanted once again. Outside, Ben saw the rust bucket parked in front of his house. Sandra, Max, and Gwen were talking on the front lawn. When Gwen saw him, she turned and smiled, waving at him. "Ben!" she shouted. "Catch, dweeb!" Ben shouted back, tossing one of his bags to her as he ran by. "What, hey?" Gwen's reflexes didn't kick in fast enough, and the bag Ben had thrown at her ended up hitting her in the face and dropping to the ground. "Ben! You get back here, right now!" she yelled after him. Inside the rust bucket, Ben went straight to the bedroom and tossed his bag inside. He turned around, intending to run back into the house to grab whatever was left of his stuff, but he found Gwen blocking his way. "Catch, doofus!" she said, smirking as she tossed his bag at his face. "Oomph!" Ben grunted as it hit him, falling backwards and hitting the ground hard. Gwen stood over him and laughed. "You ready for the trip?" Gwen asked. Her smile was friendlier than Ben was expecting. It seemed like she had completely gotten over her annoyance as soon as she'd gotten back at him. Now she was just happy to see him again. "Yeah, of course I am," Ben responded, picking up the bag Gwen had thrown at him and tossing it into the bedroom with the others. "I got a few more things to grab first. My dad's bringing a few of them out, but there's probably still more back in my room." He walked past Gwen, heading back outside. "I'll help," Gwen said, following him. A few minutes later, the rust bucket was fully loaded. "Have fun on your trip, sweetie," Ben's mother said, kneeling down to give him a hug. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," his father added. "Thanks, Mom, Dad. See you when I get back," Ben replied. "Don't worry, son. I'll keep an eye on him," Max reassured Carl. "Bye, Uncle Carl, Aunt Sandra." Gwen quickly waved goodbye before following Ben into the rust bucket. After everyone finished saying their goodbyes, Ben, Gwen, and Max were on the road again. Finally, Ben cheered as soon as they drove past the Bellwood city limits. He held up the Omnitrix, spun the dial, and slammed his hand down, stopping it on a random alien. "You! Out of all the aliens on that thing, you had to end up on that one," Gwen complained, holding her nose after Ben transformed into Stinkfly. Ben cackled as he fluttered his new wings, lifting into the air. In the cramped RV, he didn't have a lot of room to move around, so he ended up knocking several things over in the process. "Hey!" Gwen stumbled back. "Grandpa! Ben's getting stinkfly goop everywhere." "Ben, knock it off back there. You shouldn't be using the Omnitrix unless there's an emergency anyway," Max reminded him, glancing at the chaos in the rearview mirror. Stinkfly just continued to cackle and fly around in the back. Gwen rolled her eyes. With a movement of her hands, she telekinetically shoved Stinkfly to the floor. He shrieked in surprise, crumpling up and twitching. Gwen stood over him and smirked. "Now we know for a fact that I'm right the next time I say I can crush you like a bug." Very funny, Stinkfly said in his squeaky voice. That's the kind of pun that makes Grandpa laugh. Like, all the names you give your aliens are puns, Gwen responded. Yes, Stinkfly said, getting back on his feet. But my puns are better. Ah, will you just change back into Ben already? Even your usual stink is better than this. Stinkfly shrugged, then tapped the Omnitrix on his forehead. It beeped, blinking a few times. In a brief flash of light, Ben was standing before Gwen. I thought you couldn't control when you changed back into a human, Max said, having been watching in the rearview mirror. Oh, I've been practicing, Ben said, proudly. Now, let's go find some alien butt to kick. Max laughed. I don't think so, Ben. The first stop on our trip is a city that hasn't had any alien activity in decades. Ah, lame, Ben complained. Gwen didn't seem nearly as disappointed as Ben did. I think that'll be a good way to start this summer, she said. We can spend some time together, just the three of us. Pfft, screw that, Ben said, walking over to the table and sitting down with his arms crossed. I hate dumb touristy stuff. It'll be fun, Gwen said, sitting down right next to him. Besides, it can't be worse than Sparksville, right? Ben shuddered. Ah, that place was the worst. Gwen pulled out her laptop and put it on the table. Wanna play something? She asked, grabbing a controller and connecting it to the laptop. Ben shrugged. Sure, he said, grabbing the second controller. The two of them played a co-op game until Max stopped for dinner. Afterwards, they went right back to playing their game until late into the night. They didn't realize how late it was until Max parked the rust bucket. Don't stay up too late, now, he said, getting up and walking towards the back. He chuckled when he laid eyes on Ben and Gwen. And if Gwen falls asleep like that, be sure to carry her to bed, he said to Ben. Gwen, still playing, was snuggled up next to Ben, resting her head on his shoulder. Her eyelids were half closed, like she was falling asleep. When she registered what Max had said, she realized just how she was sitting. Her eyes shot open in panic and she shoved Ben to the side, sitting herself upright in the process. Ow, hey! Ben complained as he was nearly knocked over. I'm fine, Gwen said in response to Maximum. I can get to my bed by myself. Max chuckled again. All right. Good night, kids, he said, heading off to bed. Sorry, Gwen said, apologizing to Ben, looking embarrassed as she did. Ben sat upright and glanced towards where Max had gone, then gave her an understanding nod. Ah, did you want to go to bed now? He asked, still holding his controller. Gwen hesitated for a moment. No, she said. Let's keep playing for a little longer. Cool, Ben said, unpausing the game. After only a few minutes, he felt Gwen return to her previous position, laying her head on his shoulder again. I mean, I guess I don't mind, really. He decided not to say anything about it. Not long after, he heard a clacking sound as something plastic dropped to the ground. Ben looked down and saw Gwen's controller on the floor. What? Turning to his side, he saw Gwen had fallen asleep on him. You're such a kid. He laughed quietly to himself, then he remembered what Max had said. He knew he should probably just wake her up and let her walk to bed herself, but for some reason, he decided to listen to what his grandfather had told him. Carefully, he lifted Gwen's sleeping form in his arms and carried her to their bedroom, laying her down on her bed and covering her with the blanket. As he let her go and stood back from her, Gwen rolled over and grabbed his arm. Whoa! It surprised him, but Ben looked at her face. She was still sleeping. He carefully pulled himself free from her grip, then climbed up to his own bunk. "Good night, dweeb." Ben knew it was a dream because he wasn't in the rust bucket. Instead, he was back in Bellwood, and he recognized the setting immediately. He was at the movie theater, and he was watching the movie he had taken Julie to see on their first date. It didn't surprise him. He'd dreamed about Julie many times, and that hadn't stopped after their breakup, although it had been happening less frequent lately. Even though he knew it was a dream, and even though thinking about his time with Julie normally made him depressed nowadays, he still felt the way he had that day. He was nervous, but also giddy with excitement. The girl he liked was sitting right next to him, and she was there on a date with him. He could hardly believe he was so lucky. Something funny happened in the movie. Ben had no idea what it was. He was watching the screen, but he wasn't paying attention at all. He only knew something funny had happened because he heard laughter from beside him. But it wasn't Julie's laugh. It was a very distinct laugh that he'd heard hundreds of times before, and he recognized it immediately. Ben turned his head. Sitting beside him wasn't Julie. It was Gwen. Ben freaked out, but Dream Ben didn't react at all. He was still feeling that first date bliss, and somehow seeing his cousin there beside him wasn't ruining it. As Ben screamed in his head, trying to comprehend what was going on, Dream Ben just smiled. Dream Gwen turned her head, and they made eye contact. She smiled at him, wearing the same warm smile Julie had given him, looking deep into his eyes at that moment. Ben woke up in a panic, sitting up in his bed and breathing heavily. What the fuck was that? Reliving his first date with Gwen in place of Julie, Ben didn't like the implications of that. It was gross, and he felt dirty all over. The uncomfortableness only increased when he heard Gwen make a noise from the bunk beneath him. Quietly, he leaned over the edge of his bed to look down at her. She was still asleep, but every few seconds her sleeping face would smile, and she would let out a very quiet sound of enjoyment. Whatever she's dreaming about must be making her pretty happy. Oh, Ben whispered in realization, leaning away from the edge of the bed and lying down again. Gwen's making noise in her sleep. I heard her while I was dreaming, so she popped up in my dream. That's all it was. Ben breathed a sigh of relief. For a moment there, he'd been worried something really weird was happening. Let's hope Gwen doesn't intrude on my dreams anymore. Closing his eyes, Ben went back to sleep. Gwen woke up in her bed. She found that odd, since she didn't remember getting into bed the night before. How did I get here? She thought back to last night. The last thing she remembered was playing video games with Ben. Oh no, she said out loud, sitting up. Tell me I didn't. She moaned, falling back into her pillow. She pressed her hands against her face, embarrassed. She'd fallen asleep on Ben, and he'd had to carry her to bed. What am I, 5? Scolding herself, Gwen rolled out of bed. As she walked out of the bedroom to go take a shower, she looked up at Ben in the top bunk. She cringed again, imagining what he must have thought about it last night. In the Rust Bucket's bathroom, Gwen undressed, turned the shower on, and stepped inside. It's not my fault. I was just so comfortable resting against Ben, and... Gwen began to justify it to herself in her head, but she stopped. As she thought about lying against Ben, she started to feel something. Confused, she stopped washing herself, breathing heavily and looking at her hands. Her body felt warm. Guess I should turn the hot water down. Gwen adjusted the shower knobs and tried to think about something else. After her shower, she got dressed and went into the other room to get some breakfast. "Morning, Pumpkin," her grandfather greeted her. "Morning, Grandpa," she replied cheerfully. Max was eating a bowl of what looked like a mixture of oatmeal and mud. "Want some? It's still warm," he offered. Gwen gave him a very fake smile. "No, thanks. I think I'll just have some cereal." After getting her food, Gwen sat at the table to eat. It wasn't long before Ben stumbled into the room, looking very tired. His clothes were a mess and he had awful bed hair. He yawned and stretched, then looked around the room with his eyelids only half open. "You all right there, sport?" Max asked Ben. Yeah," Ben said, opening his eyes more and standing up straight. He glanced at Gwen, then quickly looked back at Maximum. "Just, had some trouble sleeping." Ben got a bowl of cereal as well and walked over to the table. Gwen scooted over, expecting him to sit with her like he usually did when they ate together, but instead he sat down next to their grandfather. Gwen winced. "Damn it, I knew it. He got weirded out by me falling asleep on him last night." Gwen tried to give Ben an apologetic look. The two of them were usually pretty good about communicating silently, especially in front of their grandfather, so she hoped he would get the message. But he wasn't even looking at her. He stared at his cereal and occasionally looked up, but he always avoided eye contact with her. Gwen looked down at her cereal in defeat. She'd been hoping Ben would have completely forgotten about her falling asleep on him, but it seemed like he was as embarrassed about it as she was, and that was even more humiliating. Luckily, Max didn't seem to notice anything was out of the ordinary. "When you finish eating, get ready. We've got a big day ahead of us," he said, getting up from the table and clearing his dishes. "Okay, Grandpa." "Okay. It's certainly going to be a long day." Four Arms rounded the corner where Gwen and Max had been watching from. "Everything squared away?" Max asked. "Yep," Four Arms replied. "Delivered gift wrapped." He had just finished dropping off some tied-up bank robbers in front of the local police station, having carried all three of them across town himself. "Good. Let's get going before anyone starts asking questions," Max said. Four Arms chuckled to himself. "Man, 3 in one day. I could have carried a fourth, even." He reached up to his shoulder and fiddled with the Omnitrix, turning himself back into Ben. "Yeah. That was real heroic of you," Gwen said as they walked back towards where they'd parked the rust bucket. Ben scoffed. "What's with the sarcasm? Those guys had it coming." Yeah. "Oh, I get it," Ben said. "You're upset that you barely got to do anything this time." "Stop it, you two," Max said. "You're both heroes. No need to find over who did what." Gwen groaned. "You and that damn watch," she said under her breath. "Gwen. Language. Sorry, Grandpa. Whadia got against the watch?" "Jealous?" Ben asked with a smug smile. Gwen glared at him. "You're such a little." "That's enough," Max spoke up, sternly. Ben and Gwen faced away from each other angrily as they walked. They didn't say another word until they were back at the rust bucket. "We're all a little upset that our time in this city got cut short," Max reminded them as he got back in the driver's seat. "Let's just get back on the road for a little while, and then we'll stop for the night. I'm sure the next place we visit will be just as nice." Gwen took a seat at the table and pulled out her laptop. Ben sat down across from her, but she didn't acknowledge him. She chose to stay focused on her computer screen. "What are you so pissed off about?" Ben asked after sitting there quietly for a minute. Gwen glanced at him, then looked back at her screen as she spoke. "We were having a perfectly nice time in that city. You didn't have to interrupt that." Ben scrunched up his face in confusion. "Excuse me? You think I made those losers rob that bank?" "No," Gwen said. "But you didn't have to go hero. I had to save those people." Ben insisted. "Those guys were no real threat to anyone. Their guns weren't even real. The security guards could have handled them just fine," Gwen insisted. "Well, how was I supposed to know that?" Ben asked. "And besides, with me helping, there was less of a chance of anyone getting hurt. Since when are you so opposed to a little heroing?" Gwen stopped typing on her laptop, letting out a sigh. Looking to Ben, her face saddening a little. "I don't know, sometimes, I just wanna have a nice, normal vacation. Relax. Have fun. Spend time with you and Grandpa." Gwen timidly averted her gaze back to her screen. Ben said nothing, and made no move to leave his spot. "What, are you just gonna sit around doing nothing the whole ride?" Gwen asked eventually. "Whatever, dweeb," Ben said. He pulled out his own portable game system and began to play with it, although he looked a little angry as he did. "I shouldn't have said that. Sorry." Gwen apologized weakly. "Whatever," Ben repeated offhandedly. Gwen sighed. "Good job, Gwen." July, Year 3. Ever since the summer began, Ben had been using the Omnitrix more than ever. He was insistent that he wasn't using it any more than he normally did during their trips, but Gwen claimed he was. Just in the last month, there had been several occasions where Ben had clearly jumped the gun and gone hero unnecessarily, only to find out the screaming he'd heard had been coming from a crying baby or someone who had nearly fallen over but managed to catch themselves at the last moment. Sometimes he would even turn into an alien while they were driving around in the rust bucket just to sit there playing video games as Diamond Head or XLR8. One night, Ben, Gwen, and Max stopped to camp out in the woods, much like the first night of their first summer. "What are these?" Ben asked, holding up the plastic bag his grandfather had handed him. "Why, they're marshmallows, of course," Max said, smiling at him from across the campfire. Ben looked in the bag and exchanged a skeptical look with Gwen. Whatever the white things in the bag were, they certainly didn't look like marshmallows. After you," Ben said, holding out the bag for Gwen. "Gee, thanks," Gwen replied, reaching inside to pull one out. It was heavier than she expected. Grandpa. If these are marshmallows, why are they rock solid?" As she spoke, she squeezed the white piece of food and held it out towards Max, tapping it with her finger. It made a sound like tapping on stone. "Just try it. You'll like it, I promise," Max insisted. When Ben and Gwen shared another questioning look, Max held out his hand. "Here, pass me one." Gwen handed the alleged marshmallow to him and he held it over the pointy end of a stick. "Yeah, these'll roast up real nice." But when he tried to stab it, the stick snapped. Ben and Gwen covered their mouths with their hands as they tried and failed to avoid laughing. "Maybe if we hang them from the stick with some string," Max pondered. "What is that?" Gwen asked, urgently. "I already told you, sweetheart, they're marshmallows." "No, I mean that." Gwen thrust her hand out, pointing behind him. Max looked over his shoulder. Something in the distance, made of metal and about the size of a person, was flying towards them, fast. Ben, Gwen, and Max stood up, readying themselves to run or fight. In a matter of seconds, the metallic object was right in front of them, having stopped suddenly and hovering in midair. It was some sort of robotic drone, cylindrical and covered in little robot arms with clamps at the ends of them. Some red and yellow lights lit up on parts of its body as it rotated. Suddenly, it lunged at Ben. "Whoa!" Ben shouted. Two of the drone's arms clamped onto Ben's shoulders, lifting him off the ground, while another clamped onto the Omnitrix. "Ow! Hey! Get off me, you stupid UFO!" Ben! Gwen shouted. She glared at the drone, held up her hands, and spoke a spell out loud. The drone whirred in distress, vibrating out of control. All at once, its arms fell off. Ben reflexively kicked the drone as he fell from its clutches, knocking it back. It rotated a few times, then fell out of the air. Max grabbed the bag of marshmallows and started beating the drone with it, leaving dents wherever he landed a blow. By the time the three were done with it, the drone was broken beyond repair. "Well, that was random," Gwen said as they stood around the broken robot, still in shock from its sudden appearance. Ben looked at his wrist. "It wanted the Omnitrix," he said. "That's not good," Max said. "If some other alien is trying to get their hands on the Omnitrix now, we may be in for a lot of trouble." "Hey, it's not like that's a first," Ben pointed out. "Everyone wants this thing." "There could be more of these," Gwen said. "We handled this one pretty well." Ben gestured to the destroyed drone as a few sparks sprayed from it. "And I'll be ready for it next time. I'll have time to go, hero." "You know, Ben," Max said. "This thing was probably able to track you down because of how much you've been using the Omnitrix." "Oh boy, here we go with this again," Ben said, crossing his arms. "I've already told you, I always use the watch a lot during the summer, and—" "That doesn't matter," Doofus, Gwen interrupted. "Grandpa's right. That robot went straight for the Omnitrix. It had to have been tracking it somehow. And whoever sent this thing isn't gonna stop after just one try. You should hold off on using the Omnitrix as much as possible from now on, just to be safe." Ben opened his mouth to refuse, but he stopped himself, catching just the slightest glint of sincere concern in Gwen's eyes. He sighed. "Ah, fine. Next time we have to fight an alien, I'll beat it senseless with a sack of Grandpa's rockshmallows instead of using the greatest weapon in the universe." "I think that's wise," Ben Max agreed. "But if we go a week without another robot attack, I go back to using the watch as much as I want, got it?" Ben declared. "Fine," Max relented. "But for now, let's pack up and get moving. If someone really is tracking us, we need to lose them before they send another drone." "Gotta say, this isn't the best mall we've ever been to," Ben said. "Just because the food court only had 2 fast food places doesn't mean it's awful," Gwen argued. The Tennysons were making a stop for Max to buy a couple of replacement parts for the rust bucket. He said it would take a bit of time, so he gave Ben and Gwen some money and told them to go have fun on their own. Since they were parked near a mall, the two of them had decided to explore the shops for a while. As they walked up and down the line of stores on each floor, they looked in the windows of the shops they passed by, looking for anything that caught their interest. After doing this for about an hour, Ben saw something that made him stop. "Gwen, look!" Ben said excitedly, pointing through the window of a store. "Home." Gwen turned her head and looked where Ben was pointing. What she saw was a magic shop filled with dusty old trinkets. "It's just like the one I got that charm of Basil from," Ben said. Gwen lifted the charm out from under her shirt, holding it in the palm of her hand. She looked down at it, then back into the shop. "I don't think hey, what are you doing?" "Come on," Ben said, heading inside. "Maybe we can find another charm stone for you to use." Gwen started to speak, but Ben was already in the store before she could finish. Inside the magic shop, Ben found a rack with various charms and talismans hanging off of it. Gwen walked up next to him while he was examining them. "What do you think? Any of them good?" he asked. "To be honest, I doubt any of them are really magic." "Yeah, I know," Ben agreed. "But do you see any that you could make into another charm of Basil?" Gwen looked around for a minute. "I really don't think we're gonna find another one, Ben. In fact, it was probably a huge coincidence that you even found this one," she said, holding up the one she had. "What about this one?" Ben asked, holding up a small stone with markings on it. Gwen looked at it in surprise. Even Ben could tell it was pretty different from the real charms, but it wasn't much worse than the first one he'd given her. "I knew it. This one'll work, right?" Ben asked, reading the expression on Gwen's face. It might, but..." Gwen had a troubled look on her face, like she was trying to find the best way to say something she really didn't want to have to say. "What's the matter?" Ben asked. "I don't know," Gwen said. I don't think I want another one." Gwen held up her charm and stared at it strangely. "What do you mean?" Ben asked. "The one you have is awesome, right? Think how much more awesome it would be if you had two. Plus, it's one more step towards having all of them, just like Gwendolyn." Gwen's face twitched a little and she gripped her charm tightly. "No," she said more definitively. "Ben, I think we should leave this store." "Why? What's the matter?" "Nothing. Let's just go see what else is around." Gwen turned and walked away, not stopping until she had left the store. Ben stood there holding the stone for a moment. He considered just buying it anyway in case Gwen changed her mind later. He really didn't understand why she wouldn't want it anyway. Was making that first charm dangerous somehow? He figured that could be the reason she was acting this way, so he put the stone back on the shelf where he'd found it and followed Gwen back outside. He found Gwen waiting outside of the store across from the magic shop, looking around like she was trying to find their next destination already. When he walked up to her, he intended to ask her more about why she didn't want to try making a second charm, but Gwen spoke before he could. "There's a pretty big retail store at the other end of the mall," Gwen said, pointing towards the far end of the building. "I wanna check it out." "Ah, okay," Ben said, following her as she started walking. He thought about asking her about the charm as they walked, but he decided against it. He still found Gwen infuriatingly hard to understand sometimes, but right now, it was pretty clear that she didn't want to talk about it. Oh well. At the store, Ben and Gwen each managed to find a few things they wanted to buy. They had already spent most of the money Max had given them on their lunch earlier that day, so they were a little hesitant to buy anything quite yet. In the electronics section, there was a demo for a new video game on display, so they spent half an hour playing it while they put off deciding what to actually buy. "This game is awesome," Ben proclaimed. "Should we get it?" Gwen asked. "Well, we've got the right console in the rust bucket," Ben said. He picked up a case for the game and read the price tag. How much of Grandpa's money do we have left? He asked. Gwen looked at the price on the game case, then into her pocket. Not enough. Ben grunted, putting the case down. Well, maybe we can come back when. Ben was cut off by a loud, animalistic roar coming from somewhere else in the department store, followed by the screams of people as they fled. What was that? Gwen asked, getting into a battle stance and looking around. The store intercom beeped, and an employee addressed the store. Attention shoppers. There appears to be some sort of six-legged crocodile thing on the first floor. I don't know what the protocol is for that, so, I don't know, try not to die. I quit. The intercom clicked as the employee hung up. Did you hear that? Gwen asked. Yeah, working retail must suck. No, doofus. The six-legged thing. Oh, yeah. Ben held up the Omnitrix. It's hero. No. Gwen smacked his arm down. No Omnitrix. We still don't know who was tracking you. If you use it, they might send more drones. Then what am I supposed to do? Ben asked, extremely annoyed. Leave it to me, Gwen said, holding up her fists, which began to emit glowing blue magic energy. So, what, you get to have all the fun? This isn't fun, doofus. Gwen glared at him. I'm gonna go stop whatever that alien is before it hurts anyone, and then we are out of here. Isn't fun. What's the matter with you? Ben looked at her, appalled. Gwen sighed exasperatedly. Forget it. Get outside, now. I'll handle this quickly. She ran off towards the sound of the commotion, leaving Ben standing there. Isn't fun. Reluctantly, Ben obeyed her orders and left. 10 minutes later, Gwen came running out of the store. She found Ben standing around, pouting like a child who wasn't allowed to go on his favorite ride at the amusement park. So what was it? Ben asked. Gee, Gwen. Glad to see you're safe. You had me worried there for a minute, but nice job handling the alien on your own. Gwen said sarcastically. Fine. Nice job, dweeb. Can I at least go in there and let the Omnitrix grab a sample of whatever that alien was? Six-legged alligator sounds like a discount repose, but it might still be cool. No, Gwen said. For all we know, using the Omnitrix for anything, even scanning DNA, could give off enough of an energy signature for it to be tracked. Let's just go back and find Grandpa, then get out of here. Ben groaned and stomped his foot in frustration. Gwen stepped back in surprise. Ben. What's wrong? She asked, genuine concern showing in her voice. Oh, nothing. Ben shouted sarcastically. Just the coolest thing I own has been reduced to a glorified wristwatch. Except it's even more useless than that, because it can't even tell time. Ben walked off, swearing under his breath. This is so unfair. The next time the Tennysons ran into alien activity, Ben wasn't any happier about his Omnitrix ban. In a crowded city street, two different groups of aliens were locked in a shootout. A group of tall aliens in white jumpsuits with laser guns versus a group of short red aliens in power armor using plasma cannons and explosives. It was hard to tell during all the chaos, but each group had about a dozen aliens on their side. The Tennysons were only a block away when they heard the commotion. Upon seeing the aliens, the explosions, and the fleeing bystanders, Ben immediately went for the Omnitrix, only to be halted by his grandfather. Ben, no. Max said, grabbing his arm and shoulder from behind. For all we know, one of those alien battalions is the one tracking you. So? Ben asked, furious. If they are, it just saves us the trouble of tracking them. I should go Diamond Head or Wild Mutt and rip them to pieces right here, right now. Will you pull yourself together, doofus? Gwen said, raising her voice. Grandpa's right. I'll handle the white and red weirdos over there. But that makes no sense. How is being tracked by those little drones more dangerous than you fighting all those aliens by yourself? Ben complained. Somebody specifically after the Omnitrix is always the bigger threat, Max said. Gwen nodded in agreement. It's not about which of us might get hurt, it's about what might happen if someone manages to steal the watch. That sounded like nonsense to Ben. So I'm supposed to just sit here on the sidelines while you do everything? Again. Gwen glared at him, then rolled her eyes and hopped onto a magic disc she conjured, flying off towards the aliens. Ah! Ben groaned. Come on, Ben, Max said. You can help me with crowd control. Ben watched as Gwen took down 2 of the red aliens, then shielded some bystanders who were caught in the crossfire. Fine, he said bitterly, following his grandfather. For the next 2 minutes, Ben ran around half-heartedly urging people to flee the scene. It seemed stupid and pointless to him, since everyone in their right mind was fleeing already. He kept watching Gwen. Every alien she took down, every cool fighting move she pulled off, and every person she saved made him more jealous. That should be me out there. He sighed, resigning himself to sideline work for the time being. That is, until he saw a man crouched in the middle of the street about to be run over by an alien assault vehicle of some kind. Panicking, Ben looked over at Gwen. She was locked in battle, and too far away to get to the man in time, even if she could hear him shouting to her over the explosions. Ben thought quickly. Screw this! He shouted, slamming his hand down on the Omnitrix. A streak of blue and black pulled the man out of the path of the alien vehicle at the last second, putting him down 6 blocks away before he even had a chance to realize he'd been saved. Rushing back, XLR-8 examined the battlefield. He spotted several more civilians trapped in the crossfire, and plenty of aliens that Gwen was yet to dispatch. He cracked his knuckles. This'll be over in no time. He has Gwen over on the other side of the chaos. She was facing off with a white alien. It aimed its gun at her, and she aimed a magical energy ball at it. But before either of them had a chance to fire, a blur ran by and knocked the alien 30 feet out of the way. What the Gwen said in surprise. Ben, no! She cried out. XLR-8 stopped for a brief second, turning to Gwen. Don't worry, lucky girl. I got this. He sped off again, carrying people to safety and knocking out aliens with speedy drive-by punches. Unsurprisingly, the fight was over quickly after he entered the fray. Knowing the military or something was bound to show up soon to clean up the mess, XLR-8 grabbed Gwen and Max and zipped out of there as fast as he could. Once they were a safe distance away, XLR-8 put the others down and changed back into Ben. Woo! Now that's what I'm talking about. Ben cheered. Those red dudes had some big guns. I wish the other guys were more of a challenge, though. Ben, what were you thinking? Gwen shouted. What? Ben asked. You used the Omnitrix, Max pointed out. We told you not to, Gwen added. Well, I guess that's your fault for expecting me to care, Ben quipped. This isn't a game, Ben, Max said. More drones could be on their way right now. Besides, I was doing just fine on my own, Gwen said. Oh yeah? Ben questioned. You think even 100 of those drones could be a threat to me after all those aliens I just took down? He said to Max before turning to Gwen to respond to her. And by the way, if it weren't for me, that alien tank thing would have ran over a defenseless person. I didn't see you saving him. Gwen glared at him, but said nothing. Face it, Ben said. You needed a real hero. And XLR8 came to save the day. Ben struck a triumphant pose. You think you're so great because of that stupid watch? Gwen shouted. It's not stupid. Ben shouted back. All right, you two, Max said, stepping between them and physically pushing them apart. Like always, you were both heroes today. Let's just get back to the rust bucket before things get any worse around here. XLR8 had dropped them off pretty far from where they'd parked the rust bucket, but after about 30 minutes of navigating the city, the mobile home was right around the corner. See, guys? Ben asked. No drones. No one's tracking me. I can use this thing all I want. Just because they didn't get here immediately doesn't mean they don't exist, Doofus, Gwen argued. Although, I gotta say, if I had the technology to know where you were at all times, I'd use it to make sure I never came anywhere near you. Well, then. When we meet these bad guys, we'll have to ask them for one of their Omnitrix trackers, because that sounds just fine to me. Max groaned, but he seemed to have given up on trying to stop their fighting for the time being. Besides, Ben said. Maybe when they finally find me, I'll get down. Gwen shouted, lunging at Ben and tackling him to the ground. Some kind of energy missile flew right over them, hitting a building and exploding in a flash of blue light. Gwen hadn't had much time to process what she was doing, but after a moment, she realized the position she and Ben were now in. Her hands were on the ground on either side of his head, holding herself up with her face hovering just inches above his. Oh! Gwen's heart beat fast from the adrenaline. They briefly stared into each other's eyes before Gwen's face turned several shades redder and she decided to roll off of him. Are you two okay? Max asked nervously, still in shock from the explosion. We're fine, nothing happened. Gwen answered immediately. Then she remembered the missile. Yeah, nothing hit us. Yeah, Ben said, his voice cracking a little. We're fine. They stood up. People around them were panicking, just like they'd been during the alien shootout on the other side of the city. Can you see where it came from? Max asked, looking around. No, Gwen answered. Up there. Ben shouted, pointing at an object flying at them at high speed. Gwen said, pointing up in a different direction. Another drone. Oh, no, Max said, spotting yet another one. In seconds, they were upon them. 6 drones in total, each identical to the one that had attacked them while they were camping. They spun and whirred as they readied their robotic claws. Get behind us, Grandpa, Gwen said, stepping in front of Max so he was sandwiched between her and Ben. You ready, Ben? She asked, a magical aura beginning to surround her. Born ready, Ben proclaimed, holding up the Omnitrix. The drones went for Ben first, attempting to grab the Omnitrix. He quickly shook them off by turning into humongous, then slammed one of them to the ground with both fists. Some of the drones produced rapid-fire laser guns and began spinning around, shooting wildly, either in an effort to shoot the Tennysons or to distract them by shooting other people in the vicinity. Gwen countered this by producing a bubble shield to contain their laser fire. Unfortunately, Max didn't have any of his plumber equipment on him, so he simply dropped to the ground and put his hands over his head. The fight didn't last long, with Humungosaur smashing the drones to bits and Gwen blasting them out of the air with her magic. When it was over, Max got up, and the three of them looked around. Smoke and blast marks from where the drones had hit were all around them. People were still screaming as they fled in terror. Sirens could be heard in the distance heading towards them. Humungosaur changed back into Ben. Gwen and Max didn't have time to be impressed with how quickly he was able to switch between his aliens now. "Let's get out of here," Gwen said simply. The others nodded in agreement. Since they were already close to where they'd parked, they were luckily able to get away this time. "We told you," Gwen said, back on board the rust bucket. "We told you this would happen." "I helped people," Ben argued. "I saved lives." "Well, what about all the people who were hurt by those drones because of you?" Gwen asked, angrily. "They'd all be fine right now if you could just get over yourself and lay off the Omnitrix for 2 fucking seconds." "Not gonna happen," Ben said. "This gift is way too great to waste. So we have to fight off a few robots now and then." Big whoop. "Those things are less dangerous than half the aliens and criminals we fight." "Grandpa!" Gwen shouted, imploring Max to tell Ben she was right. Max sighed as he drove. "Ben, for the safety of you and everyone else around you, I still think you should keep the use of the Omnitrix to a minimum." "See?" Gwen said, still mad, but smiling triumphantly. But Max continued. "I understand how much the Omnitrix means to you, and I know it can do a lot of good for the world. So from now on, only use it in life-saving emergencies, okay?" Ben smiled from ear to ear. "You got it, Grandpa," he said, turning to give Gwen a smug look. "Ah!" Gwen groaned, storming off into the bedroom and slamming the door. "I am so sick of that thing." Author's note. I'm back, and Anime Boston was great. I got to meet the NGNL voice actors, I saw the English premiere of ReZero, and I bought some sweet merch. It was a good weekend. Since this was another short chapter, I managed to make up for lost time and get this chapter done sooner than expected. This chapter kind of had a lot of action scenes, which I don't like writing, so don't expect that to be a trend. Reviews. CSGT, I'm intrigued by the last exchange between Ben and Julie. I might be wrong, but the maybe next year makes me think we haven't seen the last of the Benley storyline yet. Since it's not really a spoiler, I'll say there isn't any more Ben/Julie stuff. Julie isn't cut out of Ben's life entirely though, so you'll see her again. PR0DZ, I expected Ben to at least mature a bit more. Oh hey Gwen, what are you doing here? Fire Vortex, I love you man, awesome story. And I love you, random commenter. David's Crazy 234, I like their chemistry so much. Do you think you can make a chapter where they meet Ben's 15-year-old self? And he shows his version of the Omnitrix. There will be very little from any of the sequel series in this story since I haven't seen more than a few episodes of them. Besides, he's already 13 and a half. His 15-year-old self wouldn't be too much different. Frosty Waffles 129, love the story and how you actually take your time with the character development. I fell in love with the story around chapter 4 and haven't missed one since. Keep up the good work. P.S. Will Max ever find out? Dying to know. There's nothing to find out yet. Plus, that's clearly a spoiler question, I don't really answer those. Nive Lilm, hey, I just want to let you know that silent readers, like me, supports you every step of the way. Keep up the good work. Thank you. I get way more views than comments, so I know there's lots of people like you out there. I appreciate all of you as well. Jagsity, the first, and only, fanfics that I used to read when I was still small was Code Lyoko. I'm not sure if you have ever watched that show, but it was the only cartoon that seemed to have the perfect balance between friendship / character building and action / fighting. I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem like we get these kinds of shows, or at least cartoons, anymore these days. I want serial television, not series television. Your story is exactly how I wish Ben 10 would have been like. Dude, Code Lyoko was amazing. I absolutely loved that show when I was a kid. Probably the best show ever to air on Cartoon Network. I agree that modern cartoons tend not to have the same level of quality behind the story and characters, which is kind of why I mostly watch anime instead these days. You might want to check out Young Justice, which has the same mix of character development and action that made Code Lyoko so good. It's a more recent show that's coming back for a third season this year, you might like it. Jagsity, it's crazy how I had completely forgotten about this show, and I feel so old now that I'm looking back. This show aired from 05/08, but it feels like it was yesterday. Now I'm in college, I don't play video games or do anything fun anymore and will be applying for medical school very soon. It just so happened that I had some floor mates last year taking a stroll down memory lane watching childhood cartoons, and Ben 10 was the one that struck home for me. ****, I think it was probably Gwen's bright orange hair that caught my attention and Megan Smith's matchless voice, lol. Besides music, I think your story is the closest thing to a time machine. I'm right there with ya, man. I was 11 when this show came out, and I just graduated from college last year. I randomly came across Ben 10 again a few years ago and decided to rewatch it, which is partly why I ended up writing this story about it. Gwen was one of my first cartoon crushes too. Her orange hair and Megan Smith's voice are just too cute. Stormziff, my biggest issue is Lucy. I don't really like her. I feel like she's more of a third wheel and I don't really like her. I don't why. I just don't like her. My biggest issue is when a reader thinks it's bad for a character to have flaws. If she feels like a bit of a third wheel, maybe that's because she kind of is. She's super friendly, but she inserts herself into other people's lives too aggressively in a way that has already bothered Gwen quite a bit. Matthew, I think you already addressed this before, but I hope you don't involve Kevin Levy anywhere in this story. Yes, I've already said he won't be involved. In my story, he's still trapped in the null void, and Gwen isn't stupid enough to fall in love with someone who tried to kill them just because he's a bad boy. August, Year 3, Part 1. A summer vacation isn't complete without beach day, right? That was the explanation Max had given to Ben and Gwen. However, Gwen could tell the real reason was he thought it might give the two of them a chance to cool down. Her fights with Ben had been getting progressively worse as the summer went on, and any heroing or alien fighting only seemed to cause more problems. Even after realizing it, Gwen hadn't always been able to avoid it so far, so she was actually kind of glad her grandfather was trying to give them a nice, relaxing day at the beach. Just as long as no aliens show up to ruin it. The idea turned out to be very well timed since they also happened to find out Lucy, Joel, and Camille were on their own vacation close by, and so the six of them had decided to meet up and have their beach day together. Come on, Gwen. What's taking you so long? Ben shouted through the door to their bedroom in the Rust Bucket. Shut up! Gwen shouted back. Standing before the mirror, she nervously examined her appearance in her new, light blue, one-piece swimsuit. It had been a year since she'd last been to the beach. She couldn't believe how different it felt now. It meant nothing before, but now, wearing a swimsuit made her feel practically naked. For one, all of her legs were exposed. That didn't used to matter, but in school, she'd heard girls get called slutty for showing too much leg. Does that still apply at the beach? But how could it? What girl covers her legs at the freaking beach? This is so stupid. She muttered to herself, trying futilely to stretch the material of her swimsuit to cover more. Will people be looking at me in this? Will Ben notice anything different about me? Gwen cringed at that thought. Gwen, come on. Me and Grandpa have been ready for like 10 minutes already. Ben shouted through the door again. All right. I'll be out in a second. Gwen shouted back irritably. Turning to the mirror one last time, she took a deep breath. It's fine. I'm way overthinking this. Opening the door and stepping out of the bedroom, Gwen immediately glared at Ben, silently challenging him to comment on her swimsuit or her body or anything else at the moment. But Ben didn't seem to notice or care in the slightest. Ah, finally. He moaned dramatically. Can we go now, Grandpa? He asked, turning away from Gwen. Yes, I think we're all set. Let's head over to the beach, Max said. Gwen was relieved. Ben would take any available opportunity to make fun of her. If not even he was going to do it, she figured she was in the clear. As they walked across the parking lot towards the sand, Gwen noticed something about Ben. He was wearing his swimsuit, but he still had his shirt on. Max did too, but he always did. She thought back to every time they'd been to a beach, pool, or water park together, but she couldn't recall a single time Ben had worn a shirt while he had his swim trunks on. He usually went shirtless so he could jump right in the water as soon as he could. What are you looking at, dweeb? Ben asked, noticing her stares. Why are you wearing your shirt? Aren't you going in the water? Gwen asked out of confusion. Well, yeah, but not yet, so. Gwen thought he seemed embarrassed. Is he afraid to take his shirt off? Gwen found that idea surprising, but it caused her to breathe a sigh of relief. For some reason, it always made her feel less self-conscious when she knew Ben was too. Joel said they were here already, Max said as they arrived at the sandy beach. It was a sunny summer day, so it was already crowded with other beachgoers. So we'll just have to walk down the beach until we find where they've set up. As they walked around looking for the others, Ben fiddled with the Omnitrix, which made Gwen roll her eyes, but she thought better of antagonizing him over it. It's our day off. Don't start anything. With the sun beating down on her, Gwen was beginning to feel hot. Holding up her hand to cover her eyes, she looked up. She didn't see a cloud in the sky. But as she wondered how they managed to find a perfect day for the beach like this, she bumped into Ben, who had suddenly stopped walking. Ow! Whoa! Ben said under his breath. What? What is it? Gwen looked ahead to where Ben was looking and saw what he saw. Lucy was sprinting towards them across the sand, wearing a red bikini. Oh, come on. Ah, there's Lucy. Max said happily, spotting her as well. Yay! Lucy yelled as she got close to Ben and Gwen, leaping forward and wrapping an arm around each of them. They stumbled back and nearly fell over as they caught her. You're here. You're here. She shouted happily, hugging them both tightly. Gwen laughed as she pushed Lucy off of her. Okay, yep, we're here all right. And Uncle Max? Lucy said, stepping to the side to give him a hug as well. It's so good to see you guys. It's good to see you too, sweetheart, Max said. Come on, we're right over here. Lucy grabbed Ben and Gwen by the hand and pulled them along back the way she'd come from. As Lucy and the others approached the spot where she'd set up, Joel and Camille stood up on the beach towels they'd laid out. Joel was in a swimsuit as well, but unlike Ben, he had no shirt on. Whoa! I didn't know he had abs. Gwen shook that thought from her head and turned her attention to Camille, who wore a sarong over a bikini that Gwen found much more modest than Lucy's. Uncle Max, Joel said, stepping forward to shake Max's hand. Ben, Gwen. Good to see you all, he said, nodding to each of them with warm smile. Hello, Max. Camille gave Max a hug and a friendly kiss on the cheek. And my little heroes, how are you two? She said, stepping in front of Ben and Gwen and leaning forward to ruffle their hair. Okay, Ben said awkwardly. With Camille leaning forward like that, Gwen followed Ben's eyes and could tell where he was looking. Without thinking, she stomped on his foot. Ow! Ben complained. What was that for? Gwen shrugged. Joel and Camille laughed heartily. Still at each other's throats, huh? Joel said with amusement. They sure are, Max agreed. Ben, Gwen, and Max put their stuff down next to everyone else's. Max sat down to talk with Joel and Camille for a bit, so Lucy took Ben and Gwen by the hand again. Let's go have fun, she said, taking them to hang out further down the beach. Once they were away from their guardians, Lucy stopped and stood in front of the two of them. Well, what do you think? She asked, posing with her hands on her hips. About what? Ben asked. Of my new bikini, silly, Lucy said, giggling. Pretty hot, right? She asked, pivoting on one foot to spin around quickly. Ben looked down, and Gwen reflexively elbowed him in the ribs. Ow! Gwen, seriously? Ben moaned. Lucy giggled. Don't worry, Gwen. You look great in that too. And you, she said, stepping closer to Ben and grabbing the hem of his shirt. When does this come off? Gwen reached out and smacked her hands away. Quit harassing him, you perv. Lucy laughed softly. All right, you bunch of prudes. She took a step back, waving her hands in surrender. However, her train of thought seemed to shift suddenly as her eyes lit up with excitement. Ooh! Ooh! She shouted, bouncing up and down and grabbing Gwen's shoulder. Guess what? What? Gwen asked, wary that this was a setup for more of her teasing. After we get back from our trip, we're gonna finish moving to Bellwood, where you live, Lucy exclaimed. Ben and Gwen already knew she'd be moving to their town, but she excitedly reiterated that fact regardless. We'll practically be neighbors. And I'm gonna go to your school. And it'll be so awesome, Lucy squealed. Gwen smiled. It'll be nice to have you back in town. She thought back to the few months she'd spent living with Lucy. It had been difficult at times, but sometimes she missed having a sister to hang out with around the house. Glancing over at Ben to see what his thoughts were on the matter, she found him awkwardly looking all around him. He seemed to be trying very hard to hide the fact that he was occasionally glancing at Lucy. Is he actually? Come on, that's still weird, right? She'd seen him looking several times already since they'd arrived at the beach, but even though she'd hit him for it, she'd figured he was probably doing it mostly out of reflex. But that certainly wasn't the case right now. He seemed to be checking out Lucy quite purposefully. Our cousin. Gwen shuddered a bit, turning her attention away from Ben. This is weird. Gwen. What's the matter? Lucy asked. Nothing, just. Gwen trailed off. She was finding it hard to think of an excuse. She was finding it hard to think of anything at the moment. Everything just seemed so confusing all of a sudden, and she couldn't understand why. Lucy tilted her head curiously, but gave her a concerned look. After a brief silence, Ben cleared his throat. So, what do you guys wanna do? He asked, mercifully drawing Lucy's attention off of Gwen. Lucy looked around. Ooh. She said, bouncing on her feet and pointing towards a volleyball net set up a short distance down the beach. Volleyball? Gwen asked. Her head was starting to clear a little. The idea of playing a fun beach game instead of fighting aliens or dealing with whatever this was sounded like exactly what she wanted to do right now. All right. You're on, she said, some enthusiasm already returning to her. It's still our day off. Relax. Sure, let's do it, Ben said. Gwen was somewhat surprised since Ben had never been very good at sports, but she figured he couldn't say no to a challenge. You wanna get Grandpa and the others in on it? Ben asked. Yeah. Then we can do 3-on-3, Lucy said. What are the teams? Gwen asked. Duh. Me, Camille, and Joel versus you two and Max. Lucy decided. All right. Ben and Gwen agreed to the teams, so the three of them went back to get the others. After the volleyball game, the Tennysons hung around the beach for a while longer until it was time for dinner. Near the beach, there were several outdoor grills set up for visitors to use. Luckily, Joel was able to volunteer to cook hamburgers and hot dogs for everyone, thus preventing Max from being in charge of the cooking. When they all sat around the picnic table to eat, Ben and Gwen sat at opposite ends. Lucy noticed this, and was a bit troubled by it. For as long as she'd known them, they'd always sat next to each other at family gatherings, if nothing else but to be one another's lifeline to avoid getting trapped in conversation with strangers or certain other family members. What's wrong with them? She'd seen them fight plenty that day, especially during the volleyball game. They both had fun, but it had seemed like they were more interested in competing with each other than with the other team. This ultimately cost them the game, and neither seemed very happy with the other afterwards. Aside from that, there were those little love taps Gwen kept giving to Ben whenever she caught him checking out another girl. How adorable was that? But as far as Lucy was concerned, these things weren't beyond the scope of Ben and Gwen's usual bickering. Also, Lucy sensed there was something off about Ben in particular. He wasn't as playful and energetic as he usually was, and he normally responded better to her flirting, even flirting back sometimes. But not today. What the heck? Being surrounded by three hotties in swimsuits all day should make any guy happy. Lucy figured something must be wrong, and it wasn't just some small fight the two of them were having. Something had probably happened on their trip. So, she sat down next to Gwen and began planning how she was gonna get one of them alone to have a little talk. Time for Lucy to get to the bottom of this. She saw her opening after dinner. Everyone was finished eating, but Ben was still having a conversation with Joel about plumber stuff on the other end of the table. Perfect. Hey Gwen, Lucy said to get her attention. What? Gwen asked. Let's go for a walk, Lucy suggested with a smile, standing up. Gwen looked at her for a moment, then glanced around the table at the rest of the family. Sure, I guess. Hey, Camille, Lucy said, tapping her surrogate mother on the shoulder as they passed her. Yes, sweetie. Camille replied. Me and Gwen are going for a walk. Be back in a bit. She informed her quietly enough not to draw the attention of the rest of the family. Okay, Camille said, smiling and waving at them as Lucy led Gwen back to the beach. Once they were a fair distance away from the others, Gwen spoke up as they continued to walk along the shore. So, what's up? She asked Lucy, probably suspecting Lucy had some reason for wanting to be alone with her. Not much. Just wanted to ask you some things about your school, Lucy said, deciding to ease into things for once. Gwen gave her a confused look that said that's it, but didn't say anything about it. Ah, okay. Like what? Is it hard? Starting in September, Lucy would be going to Gwen's school. Although she'd already lived with Gwen for a few months, she'd never been to her school, having taken online classes instead. Gwen chuckled a little. Yeah, it gets pretty tough. No offense to Ben's school, but mine is much more intensive, as far as I can tell. But you still do pretty well. Well, yeah. I guess, Gwen said modestly. From what Ben had told her, Lucy knew Gwen was practically a straight-A student. Good. Then I can just copy off you. Gwen laughed. I'm sure you'll do fine, even without copying my homework. Does your school have any dances? Lucy asked. What, like prom? Gwen asked for clarification. Yeah, like that. Ah, well, the high school has the actual prom. The middle school has some kind of winter formal thing for the 8th graders before Christmas break, though, Gwen explained. Oh, sweet. So we get to go this year? Lucy said excitedly. Lucy saw it as perfect timing since she and Gwen were going into 8th grade in September. For a while longer, the two of them continued to discuss Gwen's school and other aspects of life in Bellwood which Lucy hadn't been able to fully experience while staying with Gwen before. As they talked, the sun started to go down as they got further down the beach, so they decided to sit down and watch the sunset for a bit before heading back. They sat in silence, admiring the colors of the sky. This is actually pretty romantic. Lucy considered pointing that out to Gwen since she knew it would annoy her, but she decided against it. I gotta be serious right now. Gwen. Lucy spoke. Yeah. Gwen turned her head. Is everything all right with Ben? Gwen furrowed her brow. What do you mean? I don't know. He just seems sort of down to me, Lucy explained. He usually jokes around a lot. And he's usually more energetic and friendly. Lucy was going to say flirty, but she didn't think that would be helpful. I mean, he was fun to hang out with today, but he just didn't seem himself all the time. Lucy also chose not to point out that Ben and Gwen had been fighting a bit today, since she knew Gwen must have already been aware of that. Gwen looked off into the horizon for a moment before answering. It's the Omnitrix, she said, letting out a sigh. Lucy tilted her head in curiosity. What about it? Someone's been tracking us all summer. Whenever he uses it, we get attacked by these drones, so Ben hasn't been able to use it as much as he'd like, Gwen explained. Lucy was having trouble reading Gwen. On the one hand, she seemed to feel bad for Ben. On the other hand, there was clear resentment in her voice. "Are you okay with that?" Lucy asked. "Okay with what?" "Well, I'm sure the situation must be pretty hard on you, too." "It's only been hard for me because of how obsessed he is with that thing," Gwen said, the resentment in her voice becoming more and more obvious. Lucy was worried about pushing Gwen too much. This was definitely something Gwen felt very strongly about, and she didn't want to do anything that would cause problems for her and Ben. "What do you mean obsessed?" Lucy asked, being very careful with her tone of voice. "He's just..." Gwen closed her eyes and pursed her lips, taking a breath before speaking again. "He acts like our summer trip is all about him getting a chance to use the Omnitrix. He just wants to collect all the aliens he can and be a hero. And you don't like him doing that. Our summer trip isn't supposed to be about him," Gwen said. "It's about all of us. Ben, Grandpa, and me, well, and you, too," now Gwen added, looking Lucy in the eye. "Wow." Lucy smiled warmly at her inclusion. Gwen probably didn't realize how nice that was to hear. "I'm sure Ben feels the same way," Lucy said. "I know he can seem selfish, but he definitely cares a lot about you and your grandpa." Yeah, I know," Gwen admitted. "But still, it would be nice if he acted like it a bit more often." "Do you act like it?" Lucy asked. "What?" Gwen narrowed her eyes, turning to Lucy in confusion. "Have you told him all this? About why his obsession with the Omnitrix bothers you?" Lucy asked. She suspected all Gwen had done so far was berate him about it, which probably wasn't helping the situation a whole lot. Gwen nervously scratched the side of her head as a guilty look flashed across her face. She struggled to get words out for a moment, then she sighed. I guess I could stand to tell him a bit more." Lucy smiled brightly. "I think that's a good idea." She leaned in to give Gwen a hug, which Gwen returned. Acting on impulse, she gave Gwen a light kiss on the cheek as well. Hey." Gwen nervously stuttered. Lucy just giggled, resting her head on Gwen's shoulder. A comfortable silence followed as Gwen and Lucy sat together, watching the sun continue to set. "You know, with this beautiful sunset, this is actually kinda romantic," Lucy finally decided to say out loud. "Okay, that's enough," Gwen said, pushing Lucy off of her and standing up to head back. Lucy giggled as she fell into the sand. Unbeknownst to Gwen, she wore a victorious smile as she stood up to follow her. Just as planned. By the time Gwen and Lucy got back to the picnic area, it was pretty dark. Joel and Camille were packing up their things to bring back to their car, and Ben and Max were loading their things back into the rust bucket. Joel greeted her as she approached. "It's getting kind of late, and we still need to drive back to the hotel. You ready to get going?" "You guys are staying in a hotel?" Ben asked. "Well, duh. Not everybody has a rust bucket, you know," Lucy said before turning her attention to Joel. "Sure, we can head back. Are we gonna see them again tomorrow?" she asked, gesturing to Ben, Gwen, and Maximum. "We're still in the area for another day, and then we're leaving the next morning." "How about you, what are your plans?" Camille asked Maximum. "We don't have any specific plans for the next few days, so if the kids want to spend another day or two together, we can stay," Max said. "Eh?" Lucy cheered, throwing her hands into the air. "Thanks, Uncle Max." Without any warning, she turned to her side and wrapped Gwen in a hug. "Oomph." Gwen grunted. "See you tomorrow," Lucy said excitedly, giving her another kiss on the cheek. "Why yeah, see you then," Gwen said, still a bit weirded out by Lucy's antics. Ben braced himself, knowing he was next in line for Lucy's goodbye. When she let go of Gwen, she grabbed him and pulled herself in real tight. "Oh, come on." Lucy seemed to deliberately press her chest into his, and Ben reluctantly placed his hands on the bare skin of her back as he returned the hug. Pulling back, Lucy smiled and looked Ben in the eyes, giving him a quick, flirty eyebrow raise. "See you tomorrow," she said suggestively. Ben struggled to form words. Lucy, Gwen and Camille said in unison. "Why does she always do things like this?" Lucy jumped back from Ben, giggling and holding up her hands as if to show she wasn't doing anything inappropriate with them. The rest of the Tennysons said their goodbyes as well, and they decided on a time to meet up for breakfast the next morning. "So what were you and Lucy doing earlier?" Ben asked Gwen as they climbed into the rust bucket together. "Oh, you know. Just talking about my school and stuff," Gwen said. As Ben spoke to her, she couldn't help repicturing the scene she'd just witnessed. The way Lucy had hugged Ben, the way he was obviously affected by her flirty behavior. Oh no. Gwen felt lightheaded all of a sudden. That same dreadful sense of anxiety and confusion she'd experienced earlier that day on the beach began to overtake her. What the hell is wrong with them? What the hell is wrong with me? Her opinion on Lucy was quite torn at that moment. She had just given her some rather sage advice, convincing her that she needed to have a serious talk with Ben. But immediately afterwards, she went and did something like that, which somehow made it impossible for her to talk to him right then. "Goddamit, Lucy. You feeling all right, Gwen?" Max asked with concern, seeing the expression on her face as she rubbed her temple. "Why yeah," she claimed. "I think I'm just tired." "Too tired for a quick game?" Ben asked, grabbing a controller off the table. Gwen really wanted to accept his invitation, but just looking at him was giving her vertigo. "Not tonight. I'm going to bed." "Oh, fine. Good night." "Good night." Gwen quickly made her way to the bedroom and shut the door behind her, exhaling deeply. She still wasn't sure exactly what had come over her, but something about Ben and Lucy was driving her out of her mind with uncertain discomfort. How am I supposed to talk to him like this? The next morning, Gwen was already sitting at the table on her laptop when Ben left the bedroom. "Morning, dweeb," he greeted her. Gwen gasped and flinched. She'd been feeling a little tense ever since the night before, and she hadn't been prepared to hear Ben's voice so suddenly. "Morning," she stuttered, not looking up from her computer screen. "Home." Ben sounded confused by her reaction. "What's? Good morning, Ben." Max stepped into the room, slapping Ben on the back. "Ow. Morning, Grandpa," Ben said. "You two ready to eat?" Max asked. "Joel found a wonderful place for breakfast. We should head over there now if we wanna meet them." As Max went to the front of the rust bucket to start driving, Ben sat down at the table. Gwen froze up when Ben sat down across from her, but she slowly relaxed after a while, since Ben wasn't talking or looking at her. Peeking over the top of her computer screen, she saw he was staring out the window with a blank expression on his face. For some reason, the idea popped into his head that he was still thinking about Lucy and Camille. He didn't do anything wrong. It's perfectly natural. It's just gross for me to know about it. Gwen took some deep breaths. Despite being close enough to one another to talk about almost anything, even to the point where Ben had asked her for advice on his love life. This was one area they had never broached. Even thinking about it made Gwen cringe. Neither of them said anything for the duration of the short ride to the restaurant. When they got there, they stepped out of the rust bucket and looked around the parking lot for Lucy and her family. "You think they're here yet?" Max asked. Yep," Gwen said, pointing towards the other side of the parking lot. Joel and Camille were leisurely strolling towards them, while Lucy was sprinting on ahead of them. "Eh?" Lucy cheered. "You guys are here. At least she's wearing clothes today." "Yep, we are," Gwen said. Joel and Camille caught up with Lucy, and the two of them exchanged much calmer greetings with Max and Gwen. Lucy whipped her head back and forth a few times. "Where's Ben?" she asked. "Huh?" Gwen looked around, confused, but saw Ben was standing behind Max's back. "Oh, he's right here," she said, pointing to him. Max, realizing he was blocking their view of him, stepped to the side. Ben stood with his eyes cast down to the ground. "Hi," he said, lifting up his hand to wave, but refusing to look at Lucy. "Eh?" Lucy cheered again, giving Ben his hug. He groaned in discomfort, his hands hovering behind her like he was afraid to touch her. Why is he acting all weird?" "Let's go eat," Lucy said, grabbing Ben's hand to lead him along as she skipped towards the entrance to the restaurant. Ben reluctantly followed her with a look of concern on his face. Gwen considered Ben's strange behavior. Lucy's presence obviously seemed to be making him uncomfortable. She couldn't see any other reason for it, so she concluded that perhaps he felt a little weird about being attracted to Lucy like that. Gwen scrunched her face up in disgust, but she couldn't help feeling bad for him too. "As bad as this is for me, it must be 1,000 times more awkward for him." After going inside the restaurant, the Tennysons all sat together at an open table and ordered their breakfast. Ben sat at the far end with Max and Joel, far away from the girls. Gwen was content to leave him alone and let him get over his own awkwardness while she got over hers. However, throughout the meal, Lucy kept trying to talk to him from across the table. "Hey Ben. Did I tell you where our new house is? It wasn't close enough to your school for me to go there, but it's still pretty close to your house. Isn't that great?" Yeah. That's pretty cool." He responded with a brief, mumbled answer, and then went back to talking with Max and Joel. He did this every other time Lucy tried to get his attention too. "I wasn't imagining it. He's definitely feeling weird around her." Gwen felt Lucy's arm nudge her, so she looked up from her breakfast. Lucy gave her a worried look, nodding her head in Ben's direction, silently asking a question. She must have also noticed Ben's behavior, and the fact that Gwen wasn't making any effort to talk to him either. Gwen shifted her eyes over to Ben, then back to Lucy. She gave her a nervous grimace, not really wanting to talk about it, not that they could have that kind of talk right there at the breakfast table with everyone else around them. However, she figured the other girl wouldn't be satisfied until she got an explanation, so she mouthed the word later to Lucy, who nodded in acceptance. Lucy had been hoping to get a chance to have a chat with Ben since she'd already had a little one-on-one talk with Gwen the previous day. However, with Gwen's promise of later and with Ben currently avoiding her, Lucy didn't really have a choice. It wasn't difficult to get Gwen alone while the rest of the Tennyson family was distracted with other activities, especially when Ben seemed intent on avoiding them both. And since both of their parties had decided to spend one more day together before splitting up, they still had plenty of time. So, what happened with Ben? Lucy asked, now alone with Gwen in the rust bucket. The look on Gwen's face told her there was a problem, but she didn't speak yet. This made Lucy a little worried. Did you guys have a fight? She asked, thinking Gwen might have tried to discuss Ben's omnitrix obsession and he might not have taken it very well. Gwen shook her head, slumping into a seat at the table. Lucy sat down across from her. So what is it? Gwen stared at her for a moment. The words to express the situation didn't seem to be coming to her easily. It's awkward. Lucy raised her eyebrows, now extremely curious, but trying to hide her amusement for Gwen's sarcasm. What kind of awkward? Gwen put her elbow on the table and leaned her forehead into her hand, taking another deep breath. Yesterday, Ben was kind of checking you out. Lucy waited for a moment, expecting more, but that seemed to be all Gwen had to say. Relieved, she smiled. Heh. I know. He's really bad at hiding it, isn't he? Told you that bikini was hot. Gwen looked incredulous, then narrowed her eyes at her. It's all right, you don't have to be jealous, Lucy said. I'm not. He was checking you out, too. After being cut off, Gwen sat there with a blank look on her face. She seemed to be having trouble processing what Lucy had just said. Excuse me. Yaha, you heard me. I wasn't lying about you either. You looked great in your swimsuit. Don't underestimate one pieces, especially with your body type. Ben was totally into it. My cousin didn't seem to bother him yesterday. Is that why he was being so weird today? Oh geez, I bet he had some great dreams about us last night. Gwen slammed her hands down on the table. That's enough, she shouted, putting on a serious face and raising her voice. Lucy flinched and stopped giggling immediately, a look of fear appearing on her face. Gwen glared at her for a moment, then took a deep breath. Look, she spoke in a low voice. I know you don't mean anything bad by it when you talk about stuff like that. But I don't like it. I can put up with it once in a while because I know you like it and I know you like teasing me and everything, but now you're taking it too far. Oh my god, I'm sorry, don't hate me, don't hate me. Lucy shrank back into her seat, looking frightfully apologetic. I'm sorry, she said fearfully, without a hint of her usual cheerful energy in her voice. Gwen leaned back and let her expression soften. It's all right. Just as long as you understand. Lucy nodded glumly. I guess I could have handled this more delicately. The two of them sat in silence for a moment before Lucy spoke again. So, what are you gonna do? Gwen shrugged. Nothing. I'll get over it. He didn't do anything wrong, and neither did you, really. It was just, kind of shocking, I guess. Lucy nodded her head in acceptance. I should do something, though, she said. Gwen looked at her questioningly. I don't want him to feel awkward around me, she explained. Gwen looked like she wanted to say something, but was afraid to, so Lucy gave her a look that urged her to just say it. You're not, like, grossed out? That he looks at you that way? Gwen asked. Lucy shook her head and smiled warmly. Not at all, she said. I think it's really flattering. It means I chose well when I picked out this shape. Lucy giggled. I know this body isn't real, but it's still mine, you know. It's nice to know it's appreciated. Gwen nodded, but she looked like she still didn't completely understand. Are you grossed out? Lucy asked her. Gwen's face hardened. He's my cousin, Gwen reminded her once again. Well, okay, but what if it wasn't Ben? What if it was some guy from school? Lucy asked. Gwen looked off to the side, taking a moment to think it over. It must have been embarrassing for her to think about, because she started to blush. Holy crap, she's cute. I don't know, Gwen said. I really just don't know how to feel about that stuff right now. That's okay, Lucy said, giving her an understanding smile. Not everyone's as into it as me. Gwen looked questioningly at Lucy. So, what are you gonna do about Ben? To make him less awkward around you, I mean. Lucy shrugged. I'll just talk to him about it. You can't do that, Gwen insisted. Why not? Won't that just make it even more awkward for him? Or, she cares so much about him. However, what Gwen had said made her reconsider. She had already really upset Gwen by trying to be upfront with her about this. Maybe trying to talk to Ben about it wouldn't turn out any better. Well, I guess you have a point. If you really think it's for the best, I'll drop the whole thing, Lucy offered. I think it's for the best, Gwen confirmed. Then consider it dropped. If I'm gonna teach them how to push forward, I guess I'm gonna have to learn how to back off. Gwen looked relieved. Thank you. You're welcome. However, there's one thing I'm not dropping yet. What's that? While we're on the topic of tough conversations, did you talk with Ben about his Omnitrix obsession yet? Gwen was caught off guard by the sudden change in topic. No. Not yet. I didn't get the chance to last night. I was kinda busy worrying about the other thing. I get it, Lucy said, letting Gwen know she understood. But for the record, I still think you need to do it. Yeah, I know, Gwen agreed. After having their little private chat, Gwen and Lucy met up with the others, and they spent the rest of the day together as the Tennyson family. They wandered around trying out touristy stuff and buying souvenirs, and they all had dinner together in the evening. For Lucy, holding back with Ben was tough, but she endured it for Gwen's sake. She wanted more than anything to talk to him about Gwen and do something to help work out whatever issues they were having, but she'd promised she wouldn't do anything. She even held off on flirting with him for the rest of the day, which she hoped Gwen appreciated. They split up again for the night when Joel and Camille took Lucy back to their hotel. In the morning, they all met up one last time for breakfast before it was time for the two groups to finally part ways. It was great seeing you again, Uncle Max, Joel said, shaking his hand. You too, Joel, Max replied, standing in front of the rust bucket. Hopefully we'll be able to see you more often now that we'll be in Bellwood as well, Camille said. That's right. Lucy cheered. The next time you see us, we'll practically be neighbors. She turned to Gwen and gave her one last hug. And we'll be classmates. How great is that? So great, Gwen said, semi-sarcastically. But it was nice to see you. I look forward to having you around more. Lucy took the opportunity to whisper into Gwen's ear. You'll feel better about everything once you talk to him. I know. Lucy giggled, thinking Gwen sounded like a child whose mother had given her one too many reminders. After stealing a quick kiss on the cheek, she stepped to the side to say goodbye to Ben before Gwen had a chance to retaliate. We won't be in the same school, but we're gonna hang out, like, every day, got it? She said in a jokingly commanding voice. Yep, definitely, Ben agreed. Lucy nodded with a bright smile, looking back and forth between Ben and Gwen. Good luck. she said simply, which made them both look a little confused. After one final goodbye, Joel, Camille, and Lucy got into their car and drove off. So did you have a good time with Ben and Gwen? Camille asked from the passenger seat, looking back at Lucy. Lucy nodded enthusiastically. Yep. Sure did. And I hope we made some progress. August, Year 3, Part 2. Things had gotten a little better between Ben and Gwen over the course of the past week. They had somehow managed to avoid any alien or crime-related incidents since their beach day, and with no chance for Ben to use the Omnitrix, there had been very little to fight over. After having spent most of the summer bickering a bit more than usual, Gwen was glad they were finally getting back to being on good terms. However, she still hadn't had that serious talk that Lucy had suggested she have with Ben because she kept finding reasons to put it off. At first it was because she was still a little awkward around him, and then it was because she couldn't find a moment for them to be alone away from Grandpa. But after a week of no fighting, she didn't want to risk spoiling things by bringing up a sensitive topic. However, she knew their temporary peace could never last the rest of the summer. On a warm summer day, Ben, Gwen, and Max were eating lunch at a table outside a small restaurant in the city. Ben and Gwen were discussing a show they'd stayed up late watching the night before when their conversation was interrupted by the sounds of tires screeching and police sirens blazing. A car, speeding away from the cop cars in pursuit, was headed straight for them. The Tennysons had just enough time to leap out of the car's path as it crashed through the tables and chairs set up outside the restaurant. Ben stood and watched the cop cars go by with a determined look in his eye. Without saying anything, he held up the Omnitrix, ready to go hero. Ben, no! Gwen shouted, reaching out her hand. Ben looked over at her. They're getting away, he said. It's probably nothing. Let the police can handle it, they were right behind them. So? Ben asked. I can handle it better. She's right, Ben. Max cut in. This isn't an emergency. For all we know, it's just a guy who got caught speeding and doesn't want a ticket. You need to keep your Omnitrix usage to a minimum. Or it's a couple of bad guys with a hostage who will run over a dozen people before the police can stop them, Ben argued. I'm not waiting around to find out. Ben, come on. Gwen begged, but it was no use. In a flash of light, Ben went XLR8, and he was gone. Ah! That little! Gwen groaned. With an angry, determined glare, she waved her hands to create a magic flying disc and hopped on top of it. I'm going to. Max sighed. I guess I'll just wait here, then. Gwen should have been worried about flying over people and using her magic in public without her lucky girl costume on, but she was too mad to think about that sort of thing right now. He just had to do this now. Even as she chased after Ben, Gwen was scanning the skies, looking for the next squadron of drones tracking Ben down. Looking for Ben was difficult for her since he was moving so fast, but luckily, she was able to follow the sounds of the police sirens, knowing they would lead her to Ben one way or another. On the ground, the speeding car had finally run out of luck. It wasn't able to make a turn in time and was headed straight for a wall. Two passers-by were in the way, and they screamed in panic as the out-of-control car sped at them. A blue blur pulled them out of harm's way at the last second. The car hit the wall without hitting anyone else, but the driver and his passenger weren't so safe. XLR8 ran to the driver's side and pulled off the door, tossing it to the side. From up in the sky, Gwen couldn't hear anything they were saying, but she saw XLR8 grab the driver and pull him out of the car. They yelled at each other for a second, then Ben subdued the struggling driver with a few quick punches before dropping him to the ground. The passenger opened up his door and fell out of the car on the other side. The pursuing police cars pulled up. Armed police officers got out, aiming their guns at XLR8, shouting something at him. XLR8 shrugged, then sped off before any of the cops could react. Gwen, who had been diving towards them on her flying disc, stopped herself when she lost sight of Ben. Damn it, she swore under her breath. Where did he? Hey, Gwen. A strange voice from behind her said. Whoa. Startled, Gwen spun around. Stinkfly was hovering right in front of her. Didn't I tell you I'd take care of them? He asked, cackling. Ben. Gwen said in surprise. I thought you were XLR8. Oh, haven't you noticed? Stinkfly said, tapping the Omnitrix on his forehead. I'm much better at controlling this thing now. Gwen had a sinking feeling. Switching between aliens that easily was something Ben 10,000 could do. Ben, let's go back to Grandpa. Now. Geez, lighten up, will ya? I already took care of it, Stinkfly said. He flew off, doing flips and spins as he cackled through the sky. Oh, that's it. Gwen flew after him. Reaching out with both arms, she telekinetically grabbed Stinkfly out of the air and slammed him down onto the roof of a building. Ow! Stinkfly screamed, his many legs and wings squirming. He turned back into Ben as Gwen landed next to him on the roof. What the hell, Gwen? Ben asked as he stood up, dusting himself off. Gwen marched towards him, glaring. I've had enough of this. That was a pointless and irresponsible use of the Omnitrix. No, it wasn't. I saved people, like I always do. Ben argued. No, you put everyone in the area in danger of getting hurt by those drones, all because you wanted an excuse to use that stupid toy again. Gwen shouted. It's not a toy. The Omnitrix is the greatest thing ever invented. It's what made these summer trips so great in the first place. Ben stepped forward, returning Gwen's anger with his own. Gwen felt like she'd been punched in the chest. She wanted to say what she'd said to Lucy. The summer trip wasn't about the Omnitrix, it was about family. About us. But that's not what Gwen said. I am so tired of that watch. Sometimes I think you care more about that fucking thing than you do about me. Gwen yelled, fighting back tears as she glared at her cousin. So what? I can't help it. I'm a hero. And you used to be too. Gwen took a step back, looking shocked. Seriously, what happened to you? Ben asked, advancing on her further. You never want to fight crime anymore. You act like it's a chore. And you refuse to make any more charms of Bezel. Why wouldn't you wanna do that? Don't you want them all? Don't you wanna be like Gwendolyn? Don't you? No. Gwen interrupted him. No. No, 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 no. Ben stopped talking and stepped backwards in surprise. I never want to end up like her. I never want to have to see you end up like him. And I don't want to spend our lives fighting crime. Gwen's face was full of fury, but it slowly softened as it filled with tears. I don't want to do this anymore. She looked at Ben pleadingly, then covered her eyes as she collapsed to her knees, sobbing into her hand. Gwen wasn't sure why she'd chosen this exact moment to confess all of this. She'd been keeping it bottled up for so long, and something Ben had said just made her shout it out all at once. Ben was at a complete loss for words. Cautiously, he took a few hesitant steps forward, holding out his hand. "Gwen," he said. Gwen lifted her head up. Through her tears, she could see Ben approaching her. I. She began to speak. She desperately wanted to say more, to explain herself. But as she knelt there, struggling to speak and choking back more sobs, something appeared behind Ben. 2 robotic drones rose up from the side of the building. "No!" she shouted again, shooting blasts of magic from her hands at the drones. Ben jumped back and ducked, covering his head. When he got his bearings and looked up, he was surrounded on all sides. "No!" Gwen repeated. "Not now! Not now!" she shouted, her face full of fury, but her eyes still filled with tears. She shot off a few more blasts of magic, causing more of the drones to explode and fall out of the air. Ben went for his Omnitrix, a little slow to react. But before he could transform, he was grabbed at the arms and shoulders by 3 drones and lifted off of his feet. "Hey! Put me down, damn it! Let him go!" Gwen screamed. "I'm not done." With a wave of her hands, the drones carrying Ben were shredded, and he fell back down onto the roof. In her rage, she began blasting all the drones surrounding Ben, but she failed to see the drones coming up behind her. Before she realized it, they'd grabbed her the same way the others had grabbed Ben. She screamed and made a move to cast a spell, but before she could, she felt something prick her neck. One of the drones had injected her with something, and very quickly, her consciousness faded. "Gwen!" Ben shouted in distress. Without looking at which alien was selected, Ben mashed the Omnitrix. Suddenly Diamond Head, he lunged forward, smacking drones out of his way as he rushed after the ones carrying his cousin. But the drones suddenly gained a burst of speed, jetting away. They were out of sight in an instant. "No!" Ben shouted. He roared with more anger than he'd felt in a long time, rampaging across the rooftop and making short work of the remaining drones, smashing every one of them to bits. When it was over, he turned back into himself. He spun in place, looking around him, seeing nothing but broken robot parts and carnage. He was hyperventilating. Gwen was gone. "No! No! No! I can't!" He shut his eyes tightly, then fell to his knees. They weren't after her. He screamed, slamming the ground with his fists. "They were after me. They should have taken me," he repeated to himself. He'd felt this before. It wasn't any better the second time around. In a panic, he realized he couldn't waste another second like this. "No. I need to find her. I need to get her back." Turning into XLR8, he sped off the roof of the building to find his grandfather. When he got back to where he'd left him, Ben found Max reading the paper. "Oh, you're back," he said, noticing the alien standing before him. XLR8 turned back into Ben, the fear and panic in his eyes immediately obvious. "What's wrong?" Max asked. "They took Gwen," Ben said. "What? Who took Gwen?" The drone things. They showed up, and they just took her." Ben shouted. "We need to get her back. And we will. Now, just calm down. We can." Max trailed off as he noticed one of the drones had appeared above their heads, slowly lowering itself down until it was floating a few feet off the ground. Ben screamed, running towards it, ready to smash it with his fists. "Stop!" It talked, and it did so with a voice Ben recognized immediately. Do not destroy this one. I have a message for you. Vilgax Max said, identifying the voice. Yes, Vilgax's voice said through the drone. Surprised to hear from me again? Not really. Give me back my cousin, now. Ben demanded. I will, Vilgax said. I do not care about this one. And in exchange, you will give me the Omnitrix. Fine, Ben answered without hesitation. He held up his left arm. Here, take it. Ben Max said worriedly. I cannot remove it here, Vilgax said. Come to my ship. Immediately. A screen popped up on the drone, showing Ben and Max a map with the location of Vilgax's ship. Understood? Vilgax asked. Yeah, got it, Ben answered. But if anything happens to Gwen, I'll kill you. The shock on Max's face was obvious, but Vilgax didn't react at all. His drone flew away. With a look of determination on his face, Ben held his hand over the Omnitrix. Ben, wait. Max said. It's a trap. I don't care. Ben hit the button, went XLR8 once more, and sped off. Vilgax's ship was located in a forest far outside the city. As soon as Ben arrived, he changed back into himself. No one was there to greet him, not even any drones. A hatch opened up and a metal ramp slowly extended downwards in front of him. He knew he should be prepared for an attack at any moment, but he marched up the ramp regardless, the look of determination never leaving his face. As he walked through the hallways of the alien ship, he saw nobody. No robots, no aliens, no monsters, no crew. Cameras mounted on the walls and ceiling turned to follow him, and doors would open automatically to guide him, but aside from that, the ship felt completely lifeless. Eventually, one last, gigantic door slowly opened for him, allowing him to step inside before closing behind him. Ben narrowed his eyes. Standing before him was Vilgax. He looked like he was in bad shape. More parts of his body were missing than before. They had been replaced with robotic parts, but even those looked like they were in need of repair. Next to him, Gwen was in some sort of force field cage. She was awake now, and sat there glaring at Vilgax. Gwen. When she saw him enter the room, a look of relief washed across her face. Ben. She said, standing up and putting her hands against the force field. Gwen. Ben said, just as glad to see her. Stop, Vilgax ordered. Ben halted his advance. He wanted to go to her, but he had to listen to Vilgax now. Glaring at his nemesis, he wordlessly lifted his arm, presenting the Omnitrix to him. Vilgax pressed a few buttons on a control panel. A device that looked like a dentist's chair with robotic attachments rose up out of the ground next to Ben. Sit. Ben glared at Vilgax. He knew what was coming, but he knew he had to do it anyway. Complying with Vilgax's command, he sat in the chair. Immediately, his arms and legs were clamped in place. Ben. No. Gwen shouted. I'm okay, Ben assured her. The device's armrest forced Ben's left arm to extend. Several thin, robotic arms came out of it. They clamped down onto the Omnitrix, and a few of them dug into Ben's arm beneath it. He screamed in pain as the devices went to work. Gwen started hyperventilating. Stop! She shouted, turning to Vilgax. Stop, you're hurting him. Stop, please. She pleaded. Vilgax paid no attention to her, focusing only on the Omnitrix. Ben screamed louder as the device began to lift the Omnitrix off of his wrist, ripping off large chunks of skin in the process. Yes, Vilgax said, pleased. He stepped forward, approaching Ben. Still locked in the chair, Ben was panting, having nearly passed out from the pain. The Omnitrix was off of him for the first time in years. Vilgax clutched the Omnitrix and stared at it. Finally. You got the stupid watch, now let us go. Gwen demanded. Vilgax looked up, finally noticing her again. He hesitated, probably trying to decide whether or not to just kill them both anyway. But instead, he nonchalantly reached for his control panel and pressed a few buttons. Simultaneously, Ben's restraints were undone and Gwen's force field prison was deactivated. I have wasted enough of my life on you people. Go. Now. Gwen immediately ran over to Ben, catching him as he fell out of the chair. Ben. Ben. Oh my God, are you okay? She asked, hugging him tightly. She gasped when she saw the bloody gash on his left wrist. I've been better, Ben said. Did he hurt you? Gwen shook her head. Come on, get up, she said, helping him to his feet. Let's get out of here. Pulling Ben's arm over her shoulders, she helped him walk towards the door. Let us out. She demanded, wanting Vilgax to open the door. Vilgax had lost interest in the two of them again, his eyes focused on the Omnitrix, holding it up close to his face and examining it. Suddenly, it started beeping, then turned red. What? Vilgax exclaimed. What is this? He asked, shooting a death glare at Ben and Gwen. Wearily, Ben smiled. You know, I had that thing for a long time, he said. And recently, I finally figured out how to really control it. Explain this. Now. Vilgax demanded, thrusting the beeping red Omnitrix outward. Gwen looked as confused as Vilgax, but much more afraid. Ben? She asked, worriedly. That, Ben said, would be the self-destruct mode. What? Gwen and Vilgax shouted in unison. Gwen, Ben said. Now would be a very good time for some magic. Gwen's eyes opened wide in panic. Quickly, she shouted a spell, and a magical blue bubble of light surrounded the two of them. The Omnitrix beeped faster and faster, the red light flashing like an alarm. Ben Tennyson. Vilgax roared. There was an explosion, and everything went black. Ben awoke in a dark room. He was lying on a bed, and could see a door on the opposite side of the small room. Where the hell am I? Waking up in a strange place like this made him nervous, but that quickly faded when he looked to his side. Gwen was curled up, hugging her knees, sleeping soundly in a chair by his bed. Gwen. The look on her sleeping face was so peaceful, Ben didn't want to wake her up. He quickly scanned the room, but had no way of determining where they were, or how long he'd been out. He realized she must have fallen asleep while waiting for him to wake up. Gwen, Ben whispered. Gwen moaned a little in her sleep, but she didn't wake up. Gwen, Ben said, louder this time. Gwen moaned again and fidgeted a bit, but otherwise she didn't move. Wake up, dweeb. Eh? Gwen uncurled in her chair and sat up, rubbing her face. She yawned and stretched before fully opening her eyes. When she did, she saw Ben lying there, completely awake and looking at her. Ben. She said, grasping the situation. She stood up and ran to Ben's side, leaning over him. Are you okay? She asked. Probably. I usually am, Ben said. Where are we? A plumber base, Gwen said. A functional one this time, she clarified. And Vilgax? Ben asked, rubbing his neck. Dead, Gwen answered. He's survived a nuke. And the null void, Ben reminded her. That's nothing compared to the Omnitrix, Gwen said. I don't know what Azimuth put in that thing, but the plumbers are having a real hard time covering up an explosion that powerful. The Omnitrix. Ben's arm suddenly felt light. He lifted it up and looked at it. Oh, he said, remembering how he'd ended up in a hospital bed. His arm was wrapped in gauze, and the Omnitrix was gone. I don't believe it. The look on Ben's face said it all. They had to give you some skin grafts, Gwen said. It should look good as new eventually, and the doctors said you should retain most of the function in your arm. Ben didn't respond, continuing to stare at his injury. Ben, I'm so sorry. It's okay, Ben said, but he didn't feel okay. I'm sorry too. Gwen looked at him questioningly. If it weren't for me and the Omnitrix, you never would have been in any danger, he explained. No, Gwen denied. That thing had been attracting danger for years. And it was my choice to stick by you all that time. Ben nodded to acknowledge her statement, but he still felt guilty. I almost got you killed. Again. He turned his head away from her and tugged at his bandages, trying to examine the wounds beneath them. Gwen stood by his side in silence for a minute, quietly observing him. Ben, I'm sorry, she apologized again. No, really. It's okay, Ben said, putting his arm down. No, I mean. Gwen twisted a strand of her short red hair as she chose her next words carefully. He'd given up his most cherished possession. The watch that had given him superpowers. The object that had made him a hero. The thing that had made him believe he was special. He gave it up for me. Before, when we were on the roof of that building, I said you cared more about the Omnitrix than you did about me, Gwen said, looking deep into Ben's eyes. I was wrong. Before she knew what she was doing, she leaned forward and gave him a kiss on the cheek, lingering for a moment before leaning back. Thank you. Thank you, for giving it up for me. Ben stared at her in surprise, and she stared back at him. Thump. Gwen felt her heart pound, but before either of them could say anything else, the door opened. I thought I heard talking, Max said, entering the room. Following in after him was a man in a doctor's coat. Glad to see you're finally awake. Grandpa. Ben said, smiling. He turned his head to the other man. Who are you? He asked. Hello, Ben, the doctor said before introducing himself as a plumber physician. May I examine your arm? He requested. Okay. Ben held up his arm as the doctor and Max approached his bed. Meanwhile, a feeling of terror had arisen in Gwen. Thump. She felt her heart pound again, and took this moment when everyone's attention was on Ben to quietly flee the room. Unsure of why she was doing it, she ran down the hall, found a bathroom, and shut the door behind her. Leaning over the sink with one hand on the side of the porcelain countertop and the other hand pressed against her chest, Gwen felt like she was having a panic attack. Thump. She flinched and shivered when she felt her heart pound once again. Breathing heavily, she thought she was about to throw up. She felt something. Some emotion from deep within her was stirring, and she didn't know what it was. She looked into the mirror, staring into her own eyes. What? Author's note. This chapter was really short, but I still felt the month should be broken up like this because each part tells a very different story and a lot happened in this part. Gwen finally confessed something that had been bothering her for a while. She doesn't want to be a hero anymore. The Omnitrix is gone now. Also, Ben straight up killed a guy, so that's a thing. And now, Gwen is just barely beginning to notice something Lucy completely figured out years ago. So, that's how year 3 ends. As I've said before, year 4 will be the last one, but it's also the longest one, so I still have a lot more to go through. Again, sorry for the delay. I should be able to return to my usual upload schedule now. Comments. CSGT, the drones, the six-legged alligator, and the two alien factions, were those references to something or original creations from you? They weren't based on anything, just some aliens I made up. PR0DZ, Ben's attitude is on a new high. They're both 13, right? I'm assuming at some point Ben would change on a sense. He's cooled down a little, but there's definitely still room for improvement. I like to think that, despite how fun it is for him, he still has a with great power comes great responsibility attitude that drives him to use the Omnitrix. Ha haplog, I thought Ben is not 10 years old, or am I just wrong? He's 13 years old right now. Did I screw up and say he was 10 somewhere? If so, let me know so I can fix it. Guest, I can already tell the Omnitrix is gonna be a barrier in Ben and Gwen's relationship, especially when they get into one. Props to you for constructing that in a way that's logical, realistic and not lazy. Thanks. One of the reasons I think this long-form story format is working for me is because everything feels less forced when it develops gradually. Guest, I really love Lucy in this story. Even though she didn't have that big a role in the original series, it feels like you really got it right. I'm glad you're liking her inclusion, since not everyone is. Lucy was my favorite minor character from the original series and I always wished she had a larger role. Guest, out of curiosity, have you ever thought about where Bellwood might be located? I know there's a Bellwood, IL near where I live, but the show portrays it as a semi-metropolis. Others have speculated somewhere in Pennsylvania, but the only place in PA I can think of is like Erie. Where would you imagine Bellwood to be if you had the choice? I haven't given it much thought, but I've imagined it as vaguely northeastern or midwestern, since those are the parts of the country where I've spent most of my life. September, Year 4. On the morning of Ben's first day of 8th grade, he found himself sitting on his bed after getting ready for school. He should have left already, but his arm was bugging him. The different skin color around his left wrist was annoyingly noticeable. He'd had a few weeks to recover, so it wasn't hideous, but it was definitely abnormal. Ben didn't have many people he talked to at school, but he wasn't looking forward to giving the same explanation multiple times when others noticed his wrist. His most prized possession had been replaced by a patch of discolored skin, and he was going to have to deal with other people pointing it out over and over. Frustratedly, Ben tried to clench his left hand into a fist. His thumb, index, and middle fingers responded just fine, but his ring finger and pinky barely touched his palm. The result was a weak, awkward fist. He'd probably hurt himself if he tried to punch someone with it, and he doubted it would be easy to grip anything. His frustration rising, he repeatedly opened and closed his left hand, trying desperately to make an adequate fist. When it still wouldn't work, he groaned in anger and slammed his hand down on the side of his bed. The doctor had warned him that he might lose some function in his hand, at least until he fully recovered, but knowing it would happen didn't make it any easier. Ben. His mother called from another room. "Get moving, sweetie. You don't want to be late on the first day of school." "Okay, Mom," Ben called back. He considered himself lucky that his parents had taken the news of his injury as well as they did. It helped that Max had lied to them for him, and that they never had to see it while it was bloody. They actually had a get-well cake waiting for him when he returned from the summer trip. But no matter how nice they were about it, there was very little anyone could do to cheer him up. Sighing, Ben stood up, grabbed his backpack, and left for school. Once outside, he briefly considered going XLR8 so he could get to school in no time at all. Without thinking, he lifted his left arm to gaze at the Omnitrix, only to find his blank wrist. "Oh, right. Goddamit." Ben let his arm drop and bitterly continued walking at normal human speed. Ever since leaving the hospital ward of the plumber base he'd been treated at, he'd been constantly forgetting he didn't have the Omnitrix anymore. He'd gotten so used to thinking of it as a part of his arm. Not having it there just didn't feel right. When he arrived at school, he headed to his new homeroom. The first thing he did was look around the room to see if Julie was there. He wasn't sure how he felt about her anymore, but if anyone would try to talk to him, it would be her. Right now, he didn't want to talk to anyone, because that would mean having to explain his arm. Thankfully, Julie wasn't there. Slightly relieved, Ben took a seat at an empty desk in the back corner of the room. JT and Cash didn't seem to be in his new homeroom either, which was always good news. He thought maybe he'd be able to slip back into obscurity for a while, but a few minutes later, Julie walked in. Of course. Ben put his head down the moment he saw her, but it didn't do him any good. Seconds later, she was standing by his desk. "Hi, Ben," she said. She sounded happy to see him, but it was clear that she still felt a little awkward around him too. Ben looked up. "Hey," he offered with a forced smile. "Guess we're in the same homeroom again, huh?" "Yeah, I guess so." Ben glanced around the room. It didn't look like Julie's other friends were there. He was hoping they'd draw her attention away from him, but he was on his own. "Did you have a good summer? You did that trip around the country with your cousin and your grandfather again, right?" Julie asked, reiterating something Ben had told her while they were dating. Ben tensed up. Yeah," he said, his right hand grabbing his left wrist in an effort to cover it up. "It was great." Unfortunately, the movement of Ben's arms drew Julie's attention. "Oh, you're not wearing your, oh my God, did something happen?" she asked, worriedly. "Yeah, no, I'm fine," Ben insisted, moving his arms beneath the table. "But your arm. And you're not wearing your watch," Julie pointed out, lowering her voice but still speaking very urgently. "Seriously, Ben. What happened?" "It's no big deal," Ben said. "My watch just exploded." Julie's eyes opened wide in response to Ben's casual explanation. It wasn't exactly untrue, it just left out a lot of important details. "Really, I'm fine. It didn't even hurt that much," Ben said when Julie wouldn't stop staring at him. "Well, I'm glad you're okay," she said. "Thanks." Ben smiled genuinely at that. Although he'd been nervous at first, it was already starting to seem like he and Julie would be able to be friends again this year. As Julie took the empty desk next to him while they waited for their teacher to show up, Ben put his left arm on his desk and stared at it again. "Maybe this'll make me look cool. Like it's battle scars or something." Then he tried to make a fist with his left hand again. Or maybe being crippled will rack up some sympathy points with the girls. Ben laughed quietly at that thought. Gwen would hit me if I said that in front of her. Ben furrowed his brow as he wondered why he thought of that, but his thoughts were interrupted by his new homeroom teacher entering the room. "Wow, this place looks so cool," Lucy said as Gwen led her up to the building. "It's not that impressive," Gwen said. "I mean, it's a good school and all, but it doesn't exactly look that different from other schools." "But it's so big and fancy-looking," Lucy insisted, thrusting her arms out dramatically as if she were the one presenting the school to Gwen. "The architecture is completely different from most of the other buildings I've seen in Bellwood. And everyone looks so well dressed," she said, gesturing to a group of students walking into the building. Gwen laughed good-naturedly. "You're just too easily impressed." Lucy wore a pleased smile. "Even after spending years on this planet, Earth stuff is so cool to me." Gwen put her hand on Lucy's shoulder as they entered the building. "By the way, about everyone being sort of well-dressed. This school is probably a bit more formal than your old one. So, try not to act too crazy," she advised. "You me Ian, don't tell anyone I'm an alien." "Yeah, that too." Having arrived early on purpose, Gwen took some time to show Lucy around. They visited the classrooms, the cafeteria, the gym, the lockers, and everywhere else Lucy would need to know about. The whole time, Lucy seemed excited, even though Gwen was pretty certain it was mostly the same as any other school. On their way to their homeroom, they bumped into Emily in the hall. "Hey, Gwen. How was your summer?" "Oh. Hey, Emily. Not bad. Yours?" "Pretty good. Guess we're not in the same homeroom this year, huh?" "I know, it sucks. This totally breaks our streak." Emily laughed. "Yeah, we had a good run." "Oh, and who's this?" she asked, gesturing to Lucy. "New girl." "Yeah, she's..." Gwen began to introduce Lucy, but Lucy interrupted her. "Hi, I'm Lucy." "Nice to meet you," she said, grabbing Emily's hand and shaking vigorously. "Whoa, okay," Emily said, pulling her hand away from Lucy after a moment. "Nice to meet you, too. So, you're new here?" she asked again. "Yep. Just moved into town." Lucy put her arm around Gwen and pulled her in closer. "I'm Gwen's cousin," she stated enthusiastically. "Another cousin?" Emily asked, grinning at Gwen. Yep," Gwen said, struggling out of Lucy's grip. Lucy giggled as Gwen fixed her clothes. "Lucy, remember what I said about not acting crazy? You said I should be myself, because I'm great." "I don't think I ever said that." Emily laughed at Lucy's antics. "You sure you're related to Gwen?" Lucy giggled. "Only by marriage, actually. I'm her father's brother's son's wife's mother's sister's daughter." "Wait." Emily squinted and moved her hands through the air as she tried to mentally map out Gwen's family tree. "Well, whatever the case, she's my cousin now." "Still better than the doofus," Gwen said. Emily cracked a smile. "Oh, you mean your other beloved cousin Ben?" Lucy gasped and fell forward, leaning on the armrests of Emily's wheelchair. "You know Ben?" she asked with an excited smile on her face. "Whoa," Emily said, taken aback by Lucy's face suddenly being so close to hers. "I've only met him once, but Gwen talks about him all the time." "I do not," Gwen denied, grabbing Lucy by the shoulders and pulling her away from Emily. "Lucy, personal space," she chided her. Sorry, Lucy apologized. Don't worry about it, Emily said. Well, I'm headed that way. But it was nice meeting you. Lucy snapped her fingers at Emily. We're gonna be friends, she declared. Emily laughed. Sounds good. We gotta work on your first impressions, Gwen said as Emily rolled away. No, relax, Lucy said. That went perfectly. Trust me. I've been on this planet for years, remember? I've totally got this stuff down. Gwen rolled her eyes as they entered the classroom together. Since they were both in mostly high-level classes, they would be sharing a homeroom and taking most of the same classes for the year. They sat down next to each other in the front row. There were a few other kids in the room already, and more continued to enter. As soon as someone sat down behind Lucy, she turned around in her chair to face them. Hi. Lucy Tennyson, new girl, she said, thrusting her hand out for a handshake. Oh, hi there, the girl sitting behind her said, reaching out to shake Lucy's hand. As expected, Lucy shook the bewildered girl's hand vigorously, causing Gwen to facepalm. When her hand was returned to her, the girl introduced herself. She looked back and forth between Gwen and Lucy curiously. Are you guys related? She asked, realizing the two of them had the same last name. Yep. Lucy confirmed. We're cousins. Gwen nodded her head in confirmation and gave the girl an apologetic smile. She sighed to herself as she realized Lucy would be hyperactively introducing herself as her cousin all day. As someone without many friends, Gwen was worried Lucy would annoy people, and that would make everyone like her even less. In the next 10 minutes, as everyone waited for the first day of school to officially start, Lucy continued to meet new people and strike up brief little conversations with them, which would often involve Gwen getting roped in as well. Once Gwen got a moment's peace while Lucy was talking to someone else, she overheard a group of boys in the back of the room talking about them. Anyone know who that blonde girl is? New girl. Her name's Lucy Tennyson. Tennyson. Is she related to Gwen? Geez, no wonder she's so hot. Not as hot as Gwen, though. You've just got a thing for redheads. Yeah, Misty really did a number on you, huh? That orc impossible. Man, fuck you guys. Gwen turned towards the source of the chatter and gave the boys in the back an unamused look. You know I can hear you, right? When they noticed her looking at them, they all hurriedly looked off in random directions, trying to act nonchalant. As she turned back to face the front of the room again, she saw that Lucy had also been looking back at the boys, except she was smiling. She turned to Gwen and raised her eyebrows suggestively, her eyes flicking back and forth between the boys and Gwen, gesturing to them. You heard that, right? Lucy asked quietly. Gwen sighed and nodded in confirmation. Lucy looked back at the boys again, slowly examining each of them with a devious smile on her face. Yeah, I think I'm gonna like it here. Oh, Lord. Gwen facepalmed. Lucy just giggled in response. This is great, Lucy proclaimed, skipping alongside Gwen after school. It's even better than when I was living with you before. Man, I wish I could have just gone to school with you instead of taking online classes back then. Gwen smiled. Even though she'd gotten a little out of hand a few times, having Lucy around all day at school had actually been pretty fun. She'd gotten so used to spending most school days without saying a word to anyone except to answer questions in class. She hadn't realized how much better school could be when you had someone to talk to. Gwen was used to having Emily as a sort of friend at school, but Lucy was different. She's sort of like Ben. Except annoying in a different way. So, we're going to meet Ben, right? Lucy asked. Yep, Gwen confirmed. We still meet at the park or something after school whenever we're both free. Lucy giggled. So cute. Shut up, Gwen said offhandedly. By the way, remember what I said before? Don't say anything about his arm or about the Omnitrix, she reminded Lucy. Gwen had called and explained the gist of what had happened while Ben was in the hospital, so Lucy already knew Ben didn't have the Omnitrix anymore and that his wrist would look weird. Don't worry, I won't, Lucy promised. What's Ben's arm look like, though? Is it all gnarly and scar-like? Lucy chuckled. That's a good band name. Rhyming with words you just made up is cheating, Gwen said. And Ben's arm isn't that bad now. It's just a little discolored. But seriously, don't mention the Omnitrix. It was, like, his favorite thing. Second favorite, Lucy corrected, grinning at Gwen. Shut up, Gwen said again, blushing a little this time. I can't worry about that right now. Soon, Gwen and Lucy arrived at the park. When she spotted Ben a few yards away, Lucy gasped and smiled brightly. Okay, he may not be in the best mood, so don't, Gwen began. Ben! Lucy called, running towards him excitedly. Do that, Gwen finished. She sighed and followed after Lucy. Ben had been a little spaced out, so he didn't initially hear Lucy when she called his name. But before long, Lucy was close enough for him to hear her footsteps. Home. He turned his head just in time to see Lucy pounce on him. Whoa! Ben! Lucy hugged him. It's so good to see you. It's been so long. No it hasn't, Ben said, chuckling a little. But it's good to see you too, Lucy. Well, at least she seems to have put him in a decent mood. Hey, doofus, Gwen said as she caught up with Lucy. Hey, dweeb, Ben greeted her in return. Lucy giggled. So cute. Shut up, Ben and Gwen said in unison, which only made Lucy's grin wider. So, how was your first day of 8th grade? Gwen asked Ben. Ben shrugged. Still school. Still sucks. You. Meh. I'm definitely gonna have to get used to dragging this little ball of hyperactivity around with me, Gwen said, patting Lucy on the shoulder. Ben laughed. See, Lucy. You should have gone to my school instead. With you around, at least it wouldn't be boring. But I love Gwen's school. Lucy said. The people are cool. The cafeteria food is good. And Gwen has to put up with me every day. Lucy said teasingly, hugging Gwen from behind. Personal space, Gwen reminded her, but she laughed good-naturedly along with her. So, you guys wanna come over to my house? Ben asked after Gwen finished untangling herself from Lucy. Sure. Lucy agreed immediately. Okay, Gwen agreed as well. But not for too long. We've got homework to do. It's only been one day and you're already worrying about homework. Ben asked incredulously. I could just as easily say to you, it's only been one day and you're already putting off your homework. Gwen countered. God, what a dweeb, Ben said, shaking his head and walking away. Gwen rolled her eyes, following him. Relax, Lucy said, walking beside Gwen and putting an arm around her. We didn't get that much work to do. We can hang out for a few hours, and we'll still have plenty of time to get it all done after dinner. When they got to Ben's house, they decided to toss a frisbee around in his front yard for a while. They made a game out of trying to give each other throws that were difficult, but not impossible to catch. Naturally, this led to Ben and Gwen getting quite competitive. "Oh, come on. That one was impossible and you know it," Gwen complained after one of Ben's throws went way over her head. "You kidding? All you had to do was jump on top of that car. You could have easily caught it," Ben argued. With a look of annoyance on her face, Gwen stormed off to pick up the frisbee, which had landed in the neighbor's yard. When she got back, Lucy was staring at her with an oddly contented smile. What is it?" she asked, a bit confused. "This is just like when I was living with you 2 years ago," Lucy said. "I'm just happy to be here again." Gwen smiled. It's really hard to stay annoyed with her. Her annoyance with Ben faded away as well, and she tossed the frisbee Lucy's way. Lucy was just barely able to catch it by jumping inhumanly high, and on her way down, she threw it towards Ben. Ben ran and tried to grab it out of the air with his left hand, but even though his hand closed on it, the frisbee slipped through his grasp and fell to the ground on his driveway. Everyone froze. "Oh no." Ben stared down at his hand and at the frisbee on the ground. His face was expressionless, but it was obvious he was hiding his frustration. Gwen knew what had happened. His hand wasn't working fully. He hadn't said anything to her about it yet, but the doctor had told her that he might lose some function in his left hand, although he should recover most of it in time. Gwen glanced over at Lucy, who was looking at her with worried eyes. It seemed like she had figured it out as well. "That was close enough," Gwen said. "We can count that as your point." Ben didn't look at her. "I should have caught that," he said quietly to himself. "I know, that's what I'm saying," Gwen agreed. Ben knelt down to pick the frisbee up off the ground. He reached out with his left hand to grab it, but he accidentally pushed it away from him. "Son of a," he stood up and stepped forward, accidentally kicking the frisbee underneath the car in his driveway. "Oh, come on," he shouted, stomping his foot in frustration. "Ben, it's all right," Gwen started to say something reassuring, but she was stopped when Lucy grabbed her shoulder. She gave Gwen a serious look and shook her head. Her intention was clear. "Don't do that. He'll find it patronizing." Gwen watched as Ben got down on the ground to reach under the car and retrieve the frisbee. She looked back at Lucy and shrugged, holding her hands out pleadingly. "What should we do?" "Challenge him," Lucy whispered. It took Gwen a moment to get it, but she nodded. "Hey, doofus," she called to Ben. $5 says I catch your next throw." Getting to his feet and holding the frisbee, Ben met Gwen's gaze with a determined look, then gave her a cocky smile. "You're on." Gwen had trouble focusing on her homework that night. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about Ben. The implications of him losing the Omnitrix were staggering. As clearly demonstrated earlier that day, his injury was still causing problems for him, and there was no telling how long that would last. The Omnitrix was far and away his most prized possession. To him, it was what had made him special and what had allowed him to be a hero. He hadn't said anything about it yet, but Gwen was certain he was feeling depressed without it. "And it's all my fault." Gwen sighed and laid her head down on her desk as the guilt set in. She knew no one else would say it was her fault. Most of them, even Ben, would say it was all Vilgax. But would that really be how Ben felt? "Please don't hate me." Gwen almost felt physical pain as that phrase crept into her head again. She must have said it to Ben a dozen times while he was unconscious after the explosion. "Oh God, don't." Gwen sat up and shook her head, trying to shake away her thoughts. Ben's extended period of unconsciousness was the scariest thing Gwen had experienced since the end of their first summer, back when the Omnitrix's self-destruct mode had been activated. Going through that again had been taxing, to say the least. Something else was worrying her too. The conversation they'd been having on that rooftop when she was abducted by Vilgax's drones remained unfinished. It had been interrupted, and they hadn't had an opportunity to continue it since. "I don't want to do this anymore," she'd said back then. Gwen had basically come right out and said that she didn't want her and Ben to be heroes anymore. And now that Ben didn't have the Omnitrix, now that he couldn't be a hero anymore, Gwen was waiting for him to get angry with her. At any time, he could say, "Well, you got your wish, huh?" But this isn't how she'd wanted it to happen. "I'm sorry, Ben." Ben's night didn't go so well either. As soon as Gwen and Lucy had left, his mood had gotten considerably worse. He cursed his stupid hand for screwing up that catch. He cursed it for not being able to just pick the damn frisbee up off the ground. He cursed himself for stumbling and kicking it under the car, and he cursed himself for every other way he embarrassed himself that day. "I'm so pathetic now." Losing the Omnitrix had made him so much weaker, and as far as he was concerned, crippling his hand along with it was just kicking him while he was down. But the worst part wasn't the embarrassment or the weakness. What was really bothering him was how everyone else must have felt seeing him like that. There was no way Gwen and Lucy hadn't noticed. It was obvious his hand was affecting his abilities, and Lucy had seen his skin graft for the first time. She didn't say anything, but she couldn't have missed it. They pitied him. They must have. "After all, I'm pretty pitiful now, aren't I?" Ben tried to make a fist with his left hand again, then lightly punched his pillow with it. "Ouch," he muttered. His loose pinky and ring fingers had smashed against the rest of his hand. "Come on, I seriously can't even punch stuff with it." He sighed and sat down on his bed, looking into the palm of his hand as he opened and closed it. He knew this wasn't going to get better right away. It might never get better. But he didn't want Gwen, Lucy, Julie, or anyone else to worry about it. "It's my problem. I'll deal with it." At lunch, Ben was sitting alone. He'd done the same the day before, although he had considered sitting with Julie. However, even though they'd talked a little bit, he was still pretty awkward around her. Part of it because of their breakup, and part of it because of his arm. But today, Julie approached him. "Hi, Ben," she said, standing by his table and holding her lunch tray. "Would you like to join us today?" Ben wasn't prepared to talk, so he stuttered out an answer, trying to seem more confident than he was. Yeah. Sure, that's cool," he said, covering his mouth as he swallowed the food he'd been chewing on. "Great," Julie said, smiling sweetly at him. "We're over there." She pointed over at a table where her two friends were sitting and eating, then headed over to join them. Ben shrugged, then picked up his tray and followed her. "Hey, Ben," Julie's friends greeted him simultaneously as he sat down across from Julie. "Hey, guys," Ben said. Almost immediately, he noticed them shift their attention to his arm. They took only brief glances at it, but it was very noticeable. Ben didn't say anything, but he lowered his eyelids exasperatedly as he began to eat again. His guess was Julie had warned them not to stare at his arm, but that had only succeeded in making them curious, so of course looking was the first thing they'd do when they saw him. There was an awkward silence at first. After all, It had been a long time since Ben had hung out with the three of them. Even before the summer, he'd started avoiding them once Julie broke up with him. But after a couple minutes, Julie broke the silence. "So, Ben, anything cool happen on your trip?" she asked. Yeah, Ben started to talk. In his mind, he was quickly running through what parts of the trip he could and could not mention. So much alien stuff had happened because of Vilgax, and that was immediately what he thought of, but he had to settle for telling them about all the less interesting parts. The curse of the secret identity. "I wonder if I'll miss that, too." He ended up telling them about some of the cities and tourist attractions he'd visited instead. He also told them about Lucy, who he'd mentioned a few times before, and how she'd moved to Bellwood recently. The girls all seemed interested in what he had to say, and it led into them telling stories from their summer breaks as well. When lunch was over, Ben felt relieved. Maybe I can have friends at school again after all. On his way out of the cafeteria, he and Julie went off in different directions, but before they parted ways, Julie looked his way and made eye contact with him. Smiling, she waved goodbye. Ben waved back. Seeing her look at him like that again, seeing that smile on her face, it brought back memories. But it didn't feel the same. It was nostalgic, but he just didn't see her the same way he had back when they were dating. "I guess I really am over her. Can I start doing karate with you?" Lucy asked. "What?" Gwen was caught off guard, since that request had come out of nowhere. The two of them were on their way to homeroom, and they hadn't been talking about karate or anything related to it. "I think it'll be fun," Lucy insisted. "Remember that time you taught me a little bit?" "Oh yeah," Gwen said, recalling that day from a couple summers ago. "Well, I mean, if you wanted to do karate, you could, but you'd be in a different class than me." "What?" "Oh man, why? I'm a black belt now, remember?" Gwen explained. "If you started now, you'd be a white belt, so you'd be in the beginner class, not the advanced class." "Oh, no fair." They arrived at their homeroom as Lucy pouted. As soon as she entered, Lucy set her eyes on a group of kids who were standing around talking. "Hey guys!" she called out, getting their attention. "Lucy! Hey, Lucy! Get over here!" Several of them shouted their greetings, and Lucy walked over to join them. Gwen hung back for a second. It still amazed her how quickly Lucy was able to make friends. It was only her second week, but she already seemed to know everyone better than Gwen did. "Not that I care." Gwen had never had many friends, and she had always tried her best not to be bothered by this fact, so she was determined not to be jealous of Lucy. "Gwen, come over here," Lucy said, gesturing for her to join them. Even though she would have rather just gone to her desk, Gwen relented and went over to join Lucy. She stood next to her in the circle of kids who had gathered around to talk before school started. Gwen was used to seeing groups of kids like this, but she had never considered joining them before. Everyone there gave her a casual greeting, which she shyly returned. She'd known them all for years, but she'd barely talked to any of them beyond discussing schoolwork. Lucy started telling some funny story about something that happened at her old school. Other people chimed in with jokes or related similar stories of their own. Gwen laughed along with them, and she joined in whenever someone spoke to her, but she stayed quiet for the most part. It wasn't as if she disliked her other classmates, she simply felt awkward since she didn't know them very well, and she couldn't think of much to say to any of them. For some reason, she imagined what Ben would have to say about that. "You having nothing to say. If only I could be so lucky. Gwen smiled to herself while staring into space. Turning to her side, she found Lucy looking at her with a curious smile on her face. Lenopens can't read minds, can they? Gwen blushed. She wasn't sure why she was worried about Lucy knowing what she was thinking of, but she kept it to herself. When the teacher entered the room, everyone dispersed and went to their desks. As Gwen and Lucy were taking their seats, Lucy leaned in and whispered to Gwen. "You should hang out with those guys more. They're nice people." Gwen gave her a half-hearted smile and a shrug in response, which Lucy seemed to take as a maybe. Gwen truthfully had no idea what to make of her suggestion. She didn't understand how Lucy could handle such big groups of near strangers so easily. How am I supposed to keep up with a girl like her? Author's note. Wow, that was a much bigger reception than I was expecting. I'm glad you all enjoyed the Year 3 finale, and thanks for being patient with me. Comments. Anonymous Rex, well, that was a lot of hearty development. It's funny how oblivious Gwen is. It was also interesting to actually see some writing from Lucy's perspective for once. I had another scene from Lucy's perspective much earlier too. I haven't done too many of them yet because so far she's worked better when you couldn't really tell what she was thinking. There will be more from her perspective in the future though. Anonymous Rex, I assume that's Gwen having her big realization. Not exactly, but it was her first conscious realization of it that she couldn't completely write off as anything other than what it was. Guest, one of the greatest Gwen fics of the modern era. Thanks. Good thing I got in on this fandom well after most of the competition died down. I don't think I could compete with Little Moments. David's Crazy 234, will Ben get the Bioomnitrix? Like in a future timeline. I never saw that episode. Lance Corporal ass wipe, it's so fluffy. Thanks, Agnes. Guest, this is the pinnacle of fanfiction. We got a nice little light-hearted anime-like beach fan service chapter where you illustrate the bottle of feelings the characters are experiencing and you handle that very eloquently. I like how even if I didn't mention I went to Anime Boston, you'd all still know I watch anime because I included the obligatory beach episode LOL. Guest, the kiss at the end and the feelings Gwen experienced afterwards were very accurate portrayals of an anxious, shy teenage girl stepping out of her comfort zone. Gotta ask, do you have real experiences with yourself or someone in your life that inspired you, or are you just that talented in analyzing someone's perspective? Pretty much all of Gwen's teenage girl problems come directly from things my girlfriends told me about. However, that particular moment was based on one of Satone's scenes from Juanibiao. By the way, I read your entire comment too. Thank you so much, I appreciate every word of it. Guest, well, all I gotta say is, if I were your parents, I'd be proud of you. And if my parents knew I write fanfiction, they probably wouldn't be. Guest, I hope someone animates this fanfiction in a way of honoring it when it gets over. If any of my readers happen to be fan artists, I'd probably pay to have some scenes illustrated. Guest, my nibber Gojaimas kill in the literature game. Dropping mad engaging dialogue and thought-provoking themes, yo. Guest, ever considered creating a public Discord server for your fans? I don't know if I have enough fans or understand Discord enough for that, but if someone else wants to make one, I'll endorse it. Guest, Year 3 is over. Right at August. Oh, no awkward Gwen's parents come over to Ben's place Christmas scenarios. My years go from September-August, like a school year, because they started after the first summer trip ended. Guest, Okay, this might just be me not doing my homework, but I don't get why Gwen is opposed to Ben becoming Ben 10K. Isn't Ben 10K a respectable hero in the future, even though he can come across a little cocky because deep down, he's still Ben? The way Gwen resents the idea is as if it's an evil version of him or something. Am I missing something here? Being a hero means constantly putting his life in danger, and now that the timeline is altered, there's not even a guarantee he'll survive as long as Ben 10K did. Also, Ben 10K abandoned Gwendolyn, and Gwen really doesn't want to be separated from Ben anymore. Phildev, great chapters. Didn't expect the Omnitrix to be completely down for the count, then again, maybe it isn't. It is. That wasn't meant to be ambiguous. It blew up. CSGT, ha ha ha. Ben checking out Camille and getting a love tap from Gwen was priceless. Ben always keeps his eyes on the prize. Jagsity, a lot of other fanfics seem to take the easy way out and just say one of them was found out to be adopted. LOL, screw that. You go all the way or you go home, incest shippers. Ha haplog, while I love the progress and the chapters, I thought a self-destruct Omnitrix would destroy the galaxy. I hope to be cleared about this. Okay. It wouldn't. Hope that clears things up. CSGT, I also saw a few bits of Secret of the Omnitrix here, the I don't care line, and the Omnitrix's self-destruct mode. Yep. There are 3 or 4 episodes / movies in particular from the original series that are very important to this story, and Secret of the Omnitrix is definitely one of them. And that the ending of this part, everyone. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel, and also tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.